Hello, friends, and welcome back to the Snoozy Scientist, where we drift gently through the great mysteries of our planet, one sleepy thought at a time. Whether you're listening in the quiet glow of a bedside lamp, curled beneath a blanket as the world outside drifts into darkness, or hovering in that half dreaming space where thoughts begin to blur, you're exactly where you need to be. Tonight, we're traveling through time and stepping beyond the reach of memory into ages no human eye has ever seen. A world where oceans once covered mountaintops, where creatures stranger than myth roamed continents that have long turned to dust. Today, more than 99.9% of all species that have ever lived are now extinct, swallowed by time, erased by decay, or ground into dust by the slow turning of the earth. To become a fossil is to beat impossible odds, to survive fire and flood, pressure and stone, and endure long enough to whisper a message across millions of years. But among those whispers, there are a few that defy belief. Fossils so rare they shouldn't exist. Snapshots of moments that were never meant to survive. A predator locked in mid-attack, a final breath frozen forever. A heartbeat from a creature that lived before flowers bloomed, or birds first took flight. Scientists sometimes call them impossible fossils, not because they're false, but because they are miracles of chance, fragments of forgotten worlds that time itself tried to erase. And tonight, we'll follow the rarest of those miracles across ancient seas and vanished continents, through extinction and rebirth, to uncover the rarest messages life has ever left behind. They do more than fascinate us, they challenge us, forcing us to rethink evolution, climate, and even the origins of life itself. But before we begin, I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from tonight, and what time is it there? Your comments are one of my favorite parts of this sleepy little community. If you're enjoying these late night explorations, a like and a subscribe would mean a lot. And for those already subscribed, thank you for being part of this calm little corner of science. Now take a deep breath, let your shoulders soften, and let's begin. Beneath the soil and stone of our planet lies a secret archive, a record written not in ink or language, but in the hardened remains of lives long vanished. To find a fossil is to find a message that has survived impossible odds, because the making of one is not a common outcome of death. It is the exception, not the rule. A rare accident born from a sequence of events so precise that even a single step gone wrong will erase the evidence completely. Most of the time, the end of a life leaves no mark at all. The body of a creature becomes food for scavengers or fuel for bacteria. Flesh decays, bones splinter and crumble, and even shells, which seem so strong, dissolve in the slow chemistry of soil and rain. The cycle of nature is efficient, returning every atom to the earth and leaving nothing behind to hint that a living thing was ever there. Across billions of years, this endless process has erased almost every trace of the countless organisms that once inhabited the planet. For a fossil to form, this ordinary cycle must be interrupted. The first step is swift burial. A creature that dies and remains on the surface is almost certain to disappear without a trace. But if it is buried quickly beneath layers of mud, sand, or ash, the story can change. Sediment shields the remains from scavengers and slows the work of decay. A leaf settling into the still bottom of a lake, a fish engulfed by a sudden underwater landslide, or a small mammal swept into a floodplain might all be sealed away before their fragile structures disintegrate. Once buried, another key condition must follow: exclusion from oxygen. Oxygen feeds the microbes that break down organic matter, and without it, the pace of decay slows dramatically. In the dark, low oxygen environment beneath layers of sediment, the remains may endure long enough for a new process to begin. Over thousands or even millions of years, Water carrying dissolved minerals seeps through the rock. Those minerals infiltrate the tissues, replacing them cell by cell, and eventually turn them to stone. This process, called permineralization, is one of the most common ways fossils form, transforming once living material into a durable record. Permineralization is not the only path to preservation. In some cases, organisms leave behind only thin carbon films after everything else has decayed, a process called carbonization. In other situations, minerals fill the empty space left behind when the original material dissolves, creating a natural mold or cast. Sometimes resin from ancient trees entraps insects, feathers, or even small vertebrates, hardening into amber that can preserve the finest details in 3 dimensions. And on rare occasions, freezing or desiccation halts decay almost entirely, leaving remains nearly intact for tens of thousands of years. Each of these processes captures a different kind of story, a different fragment of the past. Even when conditions are perfect, the Earth itself is a restless stage. Sediments compress and harden into stone, but tectonic forces lift, fold, and fracture them. Whole fossil beds can be shattered by earthquakes or melted deep within the planet's crust. Rivers carve valleys and wash away ancient layers. Glaciers grind rock to powder. What was once a quiet seabed can be thrust into the sky as a mountain, hiding its secrets far from view. Time is patient, and it erases relentlessly. For the fossils that do survive, discovery is another challenge. They lie hidden under layers of rock, sometimes miles beneath the surface. Many will never be seen again. Others are too delicate to endure exposure once uncovered, crumbling into dust as soon as air touches them. The fossils we do recover are usually the result of accidents of erosion, construction, or exploration. A river may slice through rock to reveal a forgotten layer. A quarry might expose an ancient shoreline. A curious collector's small dig might unearth the remains of a creature that has not seen daylight for tens of millions of years. Each fossil we find represents a continuous thread of chance stretching back through deep time. Something died in just the right place. It was buried quickly enough to escape destruction. Minerals seeped in and slowly turned it to stone. It endured the violent shifting of the earth and the weight of geological ages pressing above it. Finally, by coincidence or determination, someone uncovered it and brought it into the light. When that happens, the fossil becomes more than stone. It becomes a fragment of memory, a physical echo of a life that once pulsed, moved, and interacted with its world. It is a glimpse into vanished ecosystems, long lost behaviors, and entire worlds that no longer exist. And though the vast majority of life has vanished without leaving a trace, the fossils that remain allow us to reconstruct parts of that story, piece by improbable piece, connecting us to a past far older and deeper than we can truly imagine. There is rare, and then there is impossible. Most fossils are already improbable survivors, born of chance and luck across millions of years. But among them are a few that feel as if they should not exist at all. Scientists sometimes call them impossible fossils. They are not impossible because they are fake, but because so many unlikely conditions had to align for them to be here. They do not simply preserve bones or shells, they capture moments, movements, and molecules that nature almost always erases. They show us scenes that should have been lost forever. An impossible fossil is not about what kind of creature it came from. It could be a familiar animal or a plant no one has ever seen before. What makes it remarkable is how it was preserved. Many reveal something far more precious than anatomy. They hold the shape of behavior, the imprint of soft tissue, or even traces of DNA that have somehow endured across deep time. Others are snapshots of catastrophic events, frozen at the very instant they unfolded. These fossils are time's rarest accidents, born from a perfect storm of chance, environment, and timing. For any fossil to form at all, countless conditions must align. But for one of these exceptional fossils, the window is far narrower. It often begins with a sudden and unusual event. A predator might strike its prey at the exact moment. Both are buried in a collapsing sand dune. A volcanic eruption might bury a forest so quickly that leaves remain in place on branches. A fish might be caught mid-swallow when a landslide seals it beneath layers of silt. Such events happen on scales of seconds or minutes, yet they must also be followed by geological conditions that protect the scene for millions of years. The environment where an organism dies plays a crucial role. Gentle riverbeds and quiet lakes are more likely to create these extraordinary records than stormy coasts or open plains. In still water, fine sediment can settle quickly and cover remains before scavengers arrive. If that sediment is low in oxygen, decay slows almost to a stop. Over time, minerals carried by groundwater replace tissue and harden into rock. This delicate sequence must happen before any disturbance occurs. If erosion, tectonic shifts, or scavengers interrupt the process, the evidence vanishes completely. Timing is perhaps the most critical part of the equation. Many impossible fossils preserve events that lasted only moments. A heartbeat, a breath, a strike, or a birth is over in seconds. For such a moment to survive, burial must occur almost instantly. The fossil must also remain sealed for millions of years without being crushed, eroded, or melted by the shifting earth. Even a small change in conditions at any point in that vast stretch of time would erase it entirely. The fact that any of these fossils exist at all speaks to how many improbable steps aligned perfectly. Scientists often group impossible fossils into a few broad categories. One is behavior, perhaps the most surprising of all. Most fossils show anatomy, but behavior is fleeting. Yet there are specimens that preserve animals locked in combat, predators mid-hunt, or creatures migrating across ancient landscapes. These fossils do more than show what life looked like, they show what life did. Another category is soft tissue, which is far more fragile than bone or shell. Muscles, skin, organs, and even eyes are among the first parts of a body to decay, yet in exceptional cases they survive. Some fossils reveal the texture of dinosaur skin or the outlines of wings once stretched tight for flight. Others contain traces of brains or hearts, tissues so delicate that even a slight disturbance would have erased them. Each one provides a level of biological detail that skeletons alone cannot offer. A third category involves catastrophic events. These fossils preserve not just organisms, but the very instant of their destruction. A rain of volcanic ash might capture a herd of animals mid-stride. A sudden asteroid impact might bury a river full of fish as debris rains down. These are records of disasters that shape the course of evolution, frozen with an immediacy that makes them feel alive. Finally, there are molecular fossils. These preserve not just structures, but traces of the chemistry of life itself. Some contain fragments of proteins or pigments that reveal how an animal's body functioned. Others hold microscopic evidence of blood vessels or even fragments of DNA. These fossils bridge the gap between paleontology and biology, allowing scientists to study the molecular machinery of creatures that vanished long before humans appeared. Each of these categories reveals something that should have disappeared. A healthy behaviors fades the moment it ends. Soft tissue dissolves before the bones have even finished decaying. Catastrophes obliterate almost everything they touch. Molecules break down into simpler substances and vanish into the rock. Yet against the odds, in a handful of places across the planet, these fragile traces have endured. They are the most improbable survivors of all. The pieces of prehistory that push the limits of what science thought was possible. When paleontologists find one, they know they are looking at something closer to a miracle than a discovery. It is not just a record of what lived, but a rare and precious glimpse into how it lived, what it felt, and what happened in the brief moments that shaped its world. These impossible fossils are the rarest messages the past has ever left behind, carried across the gulf of time and waiting patiently to be read. On a summer day in 1971, a team of paleontologists digging in the Gobi Desert brushed away the dry sand from a discovery that would become one of the most remarkable fossils ever found. It was not the bones themselves that stunned them, but the story those bones were still telling. Before them lay two dinosaurs, locked together in combat, their struggle frozen in time for more than 70 million years. One was a velociraptor, small and agile, its sickle-shaped claw raised in a final, lethal arc. The other was a protoceratops, a plant eater with a heavy beak and a shield-like frill. Even in death, their positions made it clear what had happened. Predator and prey had met, fought, and perished together, their battle preserved forever in stone. The fossil has since become known simply as the fighting dinosaurs. It is a name that captures the drama, but not the full weight of what it represents. Most fossils show us bones at rest, long after life has ended and nature has done its slow work. They are remnants of creatures once alive, stripped of their motion and their purpose. But this one is different. It is a scene, a moment, a story captured mid-chapter. It shows not just what these animals looked like, but what they did, how they interacted, and how life and death unfolded in a world that vanished tens of millions of years ago. The velociraptor's right claw is curved upward, sunk deep into the neck of the protoceratops, evidence of a killing strike in progress. Its arms are stretched forward, gripping the herbivore's frill, perhaps trying to pull itself closer or maintain its hold. The protoceratops, though mortally wounded, was far from defenseless. Its jaws, strong enough to crush bone, are clamped tight around the raptor's arm. The bite is so firm that scientists believe it broke the bone. Even in death, the herbivore did not let go. It was a duel that ended in mutual destruction, neither combatant surviving the encounter. The fossil offers more than a dramatic tableau. It reveals behaviors that were once only speculation. Before this discovery, paleontologists inferred hunting and fighting habits from isolated bones, claw marks, and tooth impressions. But here was direct evidence, preserved in the very act of violence. It confirmed that velociraptors used their famous claws in combat, not just for climbing or display. It showed that Protoceratops, despite lacking the size and weaponry of a larger herbivore, could still mount a formidable defense. This fossil turned abstract theories into visible truth. How the moment was captured remains a mystery, but most scientists believe the struggle was interrupted by a sudden catastrophe. Perhaps a collapsing sand dune buried them as they fought. Perhaps a storm swept through and entombed them under shifting sediments before scavengers could scatter their remains. Whatever the cause, it must have been abrupt. Fossils that capture action require not just death, but instantaneous burial. If the bodies had lain exposed for even a short time, wind, rain, and scavengers would have destroyed the evidence. The bones might still have fossilized eventually, but the story would have been lost. That is why fossils like the fighting dinosaurs are almost unimaginably rare. They require a perfect collision of timing and circumstance. The organisms must die in the midst of activity, not after. Their bodies must be covered quickly and completely before decay and disturbance erase the scene. Geological conditions must remain stable long enough for fossilization to occur. Even if all those steps align, erosion or tectonic activity over tens of millions of years can still destroy the fossil before it ever reaches human hands. That these two dinosaurs remained locked together and undisturbed through so much time is close to miraculous. The rarity of such a fossil also changes how scientists approach it. Most fossils are puzzles assembled, piece by piece from fragments. Behavior is inferred from anatomy, from the wear on teeth, from the way muscles might have attached to bones. But a fossil like this bypasses inference. It is not a puzzle but a photograph. It shows how life and death actually happened, not how they might have happened. It offers a window into the split-second decisions of predator and prey, decisions that played out in countless similar encounters that left no trace. Other fossils have captured moments, but few are as vivid or as violent. A fish swallowing another fish, an insect trapped mid-flight in amber, a dinosaur brooding over its eggs. Each is a reminder that fossils are not only records of form, but also of action. They show that ancient life was not static, not a collection of bones waiting to be buried, but a dynamic world of movement, struggle, and survival. The fighting dinosaurs remain one of paleontology's most extraordinary treasures, not because of their size or species, but because of the story they preserve. They speak to the chaos and immediacy of life in the Cretaceous, to the constant push and pull of predator and prey. And though the world around them has changed beyond recognition, the moment they shared endures, carved into stone, a heartbeat that never faded. Beneath layers of ancient rock, in a slab of stone lifted from what was once a warm, shallow sea, lies a scene so improbable that even seasoned paleontologists struggled to believe it when they first saw it. It is not a fossil of a creature frozen mid-step or a predator clutching its prey. It is something far more intimate and fleeting, a mother giving birth. The creature was an ichthyosaur, a marine reptile that once ruled the oceans during the age of the dinosaurs. Shaped like a dolphin, but descended from land-dwelling ancestors, it was a swift and powerful swimmer, hunting squid and fish in waters that stretched across a planet warmer and wilder than our own. Ichthyosaurs were remarkable for many reasons, but perhaps their most fascinating feature was that, unlike most reptiles, they gave birth to live young instead of laying eggs. That biological leap, recorded in stone, is the heart of this extraordinary fossil. The fossil was discovered in the early 20th century in what is now Germany, preserved within fine layers of shale that once settled at the bottom of an ancient sea. At first glance, it looks like a typical ichthyosaur skeleton, long and elegant, its flippers spread like wings, and its slender tail curling gently. But then, a closer look reveals the astonishing detail. From the creature's body extends a tiny, fully formed infant ichthyosaur halfway into the world. Another small skeleton waits still inside the mother, and a third lies nearby, already born. It is a snapshot of life's most vulnerable moment, captured as it was happening nearly 200 million years ago. Fossils like this are vanishingly rare because birth is a process that leaves almost no trace. The moment is fleeting, and it happens in conditions that do not favor preservation. In most cases, a mother's body decays quickly after death, and the soft tissues involved in birth are among the first to disappear. The newborn, too, is delicate and easily destroyed. For this scene to survive, a series of improbable events had to align. The mother must have died suddenly, perhaps from exhaustion, a complication, or a shift in the surrounding waters. Her body then had to sink quickly to the sea floor, where fine sediments buried it, before scavengers could scatter the remains. Oxygen levels in the water must have been low enough to slow decay, but not so low that the skeleton would dissolve. And over millions of years, pressure and minerals would have to transform that burial into stone, preserving the moment forever. What makes this fossil more than a curiosity is what it reveals about how ichthyosaurs lived and evolved. Before its discovery, Scientists could only guess at how these reptiles reproduced. Many assumed they laid eggs like most reptiles do, crawling onto shorelines to bury their clutches in sand. But the fossil proved otherwise. It showed without question that ichthyosaurs gave birth to live young in the water. The position of the emerging infant, head first and streamlined, suggested that this adaptation was not just a quirk of evolution, but a necessity. Live birth meant that ichthyosaurs never had to leave the sea, allowing them to become fully aquatic and thrive in environments that egg-laying reptiles could not. The fossil also offered clues about the birth process itself. The presence of multiple young, some inside the body and one partially delivered, suggests that ichthyosaurs gave birth to more than one offspring at a time, much like many modern marine mammals. It also hinted at the physical challenges involved. Giving birth in water is a delicate balance, requiring both the mother and offspring to survive the transition from womb to ocean. That this ichthyosaur did not survive the process is a reminder of how dangerous reproduction has always been, even for the most successful species. Fossils that capture biological processes are among the rarest of all. They are not just bones, but stories of life in motion, moments that once pulsed with energy and struggle. The ichthyosaur mother is one of the most extraordinary examples, not because it is the largest or most complete fossil, but because it reveals something that is almost never seen. It shows life continuing in the face of death, evolution unfolding in a single, fragile moment. And while the oceans it once swam are long gone, and the species itself has vanished from the earth, the fossil remains as a quiet record of a birth that took place hundreds of millions of years ago, captured forever in stone. Beneath ancient skies, long before humans learned to carve words into stone or write stories on paper, the earth itself was already doing the recording. Every step pressed into soft ground, every trail carved into shifting sand, every tunnel dug through wet sediment was a mark left behind by a living thing. And under the right conditions, those marks hardened and remained, carrying messages across deep time. These messages are called trace fossils or ichnofossils. They are not the bones, teeth, or shells of the creatures themselves, but the evidence of what those creatures did, how they walked, crawled, burrowed, or searched for food. They are the footprints of motion rather than anatomy, a record of action rather than form. One of the most remarkable examples of this record was found in the late 1970s at a place called Latoli in what is now northern Tanzania. There, scientists uncovered a trail of footprints preserved in a thin layer of volcanic ash that had fallen to the ground and hardened over time. The prints were small, delicate, and astonishingly clear. They showed arched feet, aligned big toes, and a stride pattern that was unmistakably upright. Their makers were Australopithecus afarensis, early human relatives who walked this patch of land around 3.5 million years ago. What makes the Latoli footprints extraordinary is not just their age, but the detail they reveal. From the depth and spacing of the impressions, scientists can calculate the height and weight of the individuals who made them. The distance between steps tells us how quickly they were walking. Even subtle differences in pressure reveal how they distributed their weight, showing whether they were carrying something heavy. One set of prints appears deeper on one side, suggesting that the individual might have been holding a child. These are not just marks in the ground, they are evidence of real movement, made by living beings who passed by and left traces of their lives without knowing it. Trace fossils like these often tell stories that bones never could. A skeleton shows us what a creature looked like, but a footprint reveals how it moved. Scientists use the length of a stride to estimate speed, and the spacing between tracks to infer whether an animal was walking, running, or pausing. Sometimes the size and distance between prints show whether a creature was alone or whether several were walking side by side. A single drag mark across a trackway might mean the animal was injured or limping. A sudden shift in direction, combined with a deepened impression, could suggest a moment of panic or pursuit. Dinosaur trackways are among the most dramatic examples of this type of evidence. Across ancient floodplains and riverbeds, paleontologists have uncovered vast stretches of fossilized footprints left by creatures that roamed the Mesozoic world. Some show the steady, rhythmic steps of long-necked sauropods, their massive feet sinking deeply into the mud. Others reveal the nimble strides of smaller theropods, the three-toed predators weaving among the giants. In rare cases, two sets of tracks intersect, and their patterns change. Strides shorten, impressions deepen, and the spacing narrows. These shifts tell of a chase frozen in time, capturing a moment that unfolded in seconds, but has lasted for tens of millions of years. While footprints are the most recognizable ichthyofossils, they are far from the only kind. Burrows carved into ancient seabeds tell us about animals that lived beneath the surface, revealing how they searched for food or built shelters. Trails etched into the seafloor by slow-moving invertebrates record their foraging paths, feeding traces where creatures scraped or bored into wood and shells provide direct evidence of diet and behavior. Even raindrop impressions and ripple marks, though not made by animals, add context to these scenes, painting a fuller picture of the environments where these organisms lived. Creating a trace fossil requires a delicate balance of circumstances. The surface must be soft enough to record an impression, but firm enough to hold its shape. Burial must happen quickly, often within hours or days, before wind, water, or other creatures erase the marks. Layers of sediment must pile up over time, sealing and compressing the traces until they harden into stone. Any interruption in this sequence, and the story vanishes. That is why iconofossils are far rarer than ordinary rocks, but far more revealing than their simplicity suggests. The power of these fossils lies in their immediacy. They capture not what a creature was, but what it was doing. A footprint is a step in motion, a pause in a journey, a decision made in an instant and pressed into the earth. A burrow is the result of persistence, a record of effort and purpose. A trail shows the path of exploration, the route a creature took as it searched, wandered, or hunted. Together they form a silent choreography of ancient life, a dance preserved in stone. The creatures that left these marks never intended to leave a message, yet their movements, frozen by chance and preserved by time, have become one of the most intimate records of the past. Long after their bodies crumbled and their bones turned to dust, the stories written by their footsteps, burrows, and trails remain, and through them we can follow those ancient lives, step by step, across landscapes that no longer exist, into worlds that would otherwise be lost forever. Across the immense span of Earth's history, life has rarely been still. It has pulsed and flowed like a living tide, moving across continents and through seas in patterns as ancient as time itself. Creatures have gathered and dispersed, hunted and fled, built homes and raised their young, shaping the landscapes they lived in and responding to forces far beyond their control. These behaviors, so central to survival, are also some of the most fleeting. They unfold in motion and then disappear, leaving no trace once the moment passes. Yet, in a few extraordinary cases, the evidence of those actions has been captured and locked into stone. These are fossils not of bodies, but of stories, records of life in motion, preserved by chance and revealed millions of years later. Some of the most revealing of these stories involve the great migrations that once swept across prehistoric landscapes. Herds of herbivorous dinosaurs likely moved seasonally, following the shifting availability of plants, much as wildebeest or caribou do today. Fossil sites scattered across what are now dry plains suggest that sauropods, The long-necked giants of the Jurassic traveled in coordinated groups. The distribution of fossilized bones, the alignment of individual skeletons, and the presence of juveniles alongside adults all point to collective journeys that spanned great distances. These were not aimless wanderings but carefully timed movements, possibly linked to rainfall patterns, plant growth cycles, or breeding seasons. Even more compelling are cases where the traces of different species intersect, hinting at the complex web of predator and prey that once played out on these landscapes. In a region of present-day North America, paleontologists discovered the fossilized remains of a large herbivorous dinosaur whose bones bore deep gashes and puncture marks. Scattered nearby were the teeth of a predatory theropod, shed during a struggle. Although the bodies themselves tell only part of the story, their proximity and the evidence of violent interaction suggest that this was once the site of a hunt, a desperate chase that ended in a kill, preserved by the luck of burial, before scavengers erased the scene. Other fossils capture moments not of conflict, but of care. In the sands of Mongolia's Gobi Desert, an oviraptora dinosaur was found crouched over a nest of eggs, its arms encircling them like a shield. The animal had died in that position, likely overwhelmed by a sudden storm of sand and ash, but the posture was unmistakable. It was brooding, warming its eggs, and protecting them from harm, much as modern birds do today. This single fossil changed our understanding of dinosaur reproduction. It revealed a level of parental investment that had once been thought impossible for creatures often portrayed as cold and instinct-driven. It showed that deep bonds between parent and offspring existed tens of millions of years before mammals or birds rose to prominence. There are even rarer cases where the fossil record suggests cooperation during the hunt, a behavior that demands coordination, communication, and shared intent. In one site in Utah, dozens of small, slender footprints attributed to dromaeosaurs, agile predators related to velociraptor, were found moving in the same direction, side by side. Nearby, the remains of a large herbivorous dinosaur showed signs of sudden flight, its bones fractured in ways consistent with a violent takedown. The evidence is not definitive, but the clues align with what we see in modern pack hunters, like wolves or lions, which use group strategies to overpower prey far larger than themselves. If correct, this would mean that cooperative hunting evolved far earlier than once believed, reshaping our understanding of dinosaur intelligence and social structure. Behavioral fossils also tell us about how prehistoric animals lived together in vast numbers. In Patagonia, an enormous nesting ground belonging to titanosaurs, some of the largest land animals to ever exist, revealed hundreds of egg clusters spread across a wide area. The eggs were arranged in organized rows, suggesting that these colossal dinosaurs returned to the same location year after year to breed. Many of the eggs contained fossilized embryos, still curled within their shells. Such communal nesting behavior is seen today in many bird and reptile species, and its presence in creatures so ancient speaks to deep evolutionary roots in reproductive strategy. These glimpses into the past are extraordinarily rare because the conditions needed to preserve behavior are almost impossibly specific. A hunt must end in a burial event before scavengers can scatter the evidence. A nest must be sealed before wind and rain erase its outlines. A predator and its prey must die in proximity for their story to survive. Each example is the result of countless coincidences layered across millions of years, a frozen moment that escaped the natural erasure of time. And yet, when those moments are captured, they give the fossil record something it usually lacks: movement. They show us not just what ancient creatures were, but what they did, how they lived, and how they shaped the worlds they inhabited. They reveal patterns of migration and cooperation, acts of care and aggression, cycles of life and death playing out across deep time. In these preserved stories, life becomes more than a static record of bones and shells. It becomes dynamic, purposeful, and alive, reminding us that the ancient past was every bit as complex and interconnected as the living world we know today. Beneath the wind-swept prairies of North Dakota, where layers of sandstone have pressed together for tens of millions of years, a discovery once emerged that changed how we imagine the age of dinosaurs. It was not just a jumble of bones or a partial skeleton worn by time. It was something far rarer, the remains of a creature whose body still carried the memory of flesh. The fossil belonged to a hadrosaur, a plant-eating dinosaur with a broad, duck-like beak and a body built for long journeys across the floodplains of the late Cretaceous. Scientists named it Dakota, and it would become one of the most extraordinary fossils ever found. Dakota was an Edmontosaurus, a common member of its ecosystem, and yet nothing about this fossil was ordinary. The animal had died near an ancient river, and the sands had covered it quickly, sealing it from the decay and scavengers that destroy most remains. Millions of years later, when paleontologists uncovered it, they found not just a skeleton, but a preserved body. Its skin still clung to the stone. The outlines of its muscles and tendons were still visible. Even the shape of its head and face could be traced. This was not just a fossilized frame, it was a portrait of a living animal, frozen in time. What scientists saw beneath the layers of rock was far more detailed than anything they had ever expected. The skin, for example, was covered in small, pebbly scales that changed shape and size across the body. On the limbs, they formed flexible mosaics, suggesting that the skin could stretch and bend with movement. On the sides, the scales were larger and arranged in rows, perhaps for protection or display. These patterns hinted that Edmontosaurus was not the leathery, uniform creature often shown in old illustrations. Its skin was dynamic and complex, a living surface that moved and shifted as the animal walked, ran, and grazed. More revealing still was what lay beneath the skin. The preservation of muscles and tendons gave scientists their first real glimpse into how a hadrosaur's body worked in motion. The arrangement of the muscles along the forelimbs showed that they were more powerful than once believed, capable of supporting the dinosaur's weight as it walked on all fours across open landscapes. In the tail, long strands of tendon ran in thick cords, anchoring massive muscles that would have powered swift strides. These details suggested that Edmontosaurus was not the sluggish grazer many had pictured. It was strong and capable of bursts of speed, with a body built for both endurance and agility. The fossil also changed how scientists thought about the shape and posture of hadrosaurs. Before Dakota, reconstructions often portrayed them as bulky and round, with heavy bellies and sagging skin. But the preserved outlines told a different story. Dakota's body was leaner, with more defined muscles and a streamlined form. This new image suggested a creature that could switch easily between walking on four legs while feeding and rising on two legs to move quickly or scan its surroundings. The tail, once thought to be a stiff counterweight, now appeared as a flexible, muscular organ that helped balance the body and propel it forward. Even the skin patterns offered new clues about how these animals might have lived. Though no pigments survived in Dakota's fossil, the variation in scale size and texture implied that the dinosaur's appearance was likely more striking than the dull, monotone hides often shown in museums. Some paleontologists believe that these patterns might have been paired with contrasting colors for communication within herds, or perhaps to confuse predators. Others think the arrangement of scales could have influenced how light reflected off the skin, breaking up the animal's outline and helping it blend into its surroundings. The head and face preserved in Dakota's fossil provided perhaps the most intimate glimpse of all. Instead of bare bone, scientists could trace the contours of the snout, the edges of the nostrils, and even the shape of the cheeks. These features suggested a far more expressive and capable face than once thought. The structure of the mouth hinted at precise feeding behaviors, and the soft tissues around the jaw implied a degree of flexibility that might have helped the dinosaur process a wide variety of plants. These subtle details revealed that Edmontosaurus was not just a passive grazer, but an active forager, finely adapted to its environment. For paleoartists, those who reconstruct ancient life visually, Dakota became a turning point. Old illustrations that depicted hadrosaurs as saggy, dull-skinned reptiles quickly fell out of favor. New reconstructions showed sleek, muscular animals with powerful tails and skin that wrapped tightly over defined muscles. Their faces became more detailed, their postures more dynamic, their movements more lifelike. Dakota had given them the evidence they needed to bring these animals to life, with a new level of accuracy. Hidden within its stone tomb, Dakota had carried far more than the memory of a skeleton. It had preserved the story of a living, breathing creature, how it moved, how it looked, how it interacted with the world around it. The skin, the muscles, the shape of the body, each revealed details that bones alone could never tell. It was as if a curtain had been pulled back, offering a fleeting but vivid glimpse into the world of the past, where giants like Edmontosaurus once roamed beneath ancient skies. When the armored dinosaur known as Borealopelta was discovered in the Canadian province of Alberta in the early 21st century, it immediately stood apart from almost every other fossil ever found. It was not just the completeness of its skeleton or the remarkable condition of its skin, which still bore the patterns and textures of life. It was something hidden deep inside its body, something so delicate that it should have vanished millions of years ago. Its final meal. Borealopelta was a nodosaur, a member of the Ankylosaur family, covered from head to tail in thick plates of bone and spikes that formed a living suit of armor. It lived about 110 million years ago, during the early Cretaceous period, when much of what is now Western Canada lay beneath a shallow inland sea. At the time of its death, it was a plant eater, browsing the low vegetation that grew along the edges of coastal forests and floodplains. Like all herbivorous dinosaurs, it spent much of its day eating, and its survival depended on the quality and abundance of the plants it consumed. The fossil was so well preserved that researchers could study details that almost never survive. They could trace the outlines of its scales and the spikes that once protected it from predators. They could see impressions of soft tissue, giving them hints about its weight and posture. But when they examined the chest cavity, they found something even more surprising. Within the space where the dinosaur's stomach had once been, there was a concentrated mass of fossilized plant material. After more than 100 million years, its last meal was still there. The preserved stomach contents were carefully removed and studied under microscopes. What scientists found inside was a detailed snapshot of what Borealopelta had eaten in the final hours of its life. Most of the material consisted of ferns, finely chopped by its beak and ground by its teeth. The ferns were so well preserved that researchers could identify specific types, revealing not just what kind of plants it ate, but also the environment in which it fed. Alongside the ferns were traces of cycads and conifers, plants that dominated early Cretaceous landscapes before flowering plants became widespread. Tiny fragments of charcoal were also present, suggesting that Borealopelta had been feeding in an area recently affected by wildfire, where new plant growth was sprouting among the ashes. This discovery opened a rare window into an ancient ecosystem. Usually, scientists must reconstruct prehistoric diets indirectly by examining tooth shape, wear patterns, or the types of plants that grew at the time. But here was direct evidence, a record of what one individual had actually eaten. It revealed that Borealopelta was a selective feeder, choosing certain plants over others, even in a world full of options. It also showed that fire played a role in shaping dinosaur diets, just as it does for many herbivores today. New shoots growing in the nutrient-rich soil after a blaze are often softer and richer in nutrients, making them attractive food sources. The contents of Borealopelta's stomach also tell a story about plant evolution. The early Cretaceous was a time of transition when flowering plants were only beginning to spread across the planet. The dominance of ferns, cycads, and conifers in Borealopelta's diet reflects a landscape still shaped by older plant lineages. These groups had already been present for hundreds of millions of years, forming the foundation of ecosystems that supported countless herbivores. Over time, flowering plants would diversify and overtake many of these older species, reshaping the diets and behaviors of animals around them. Borealopelta lived at the cusp of this shift, and its last meal captures a snapshot of a world in flux. Preserving something as fragile as a dinosaur's stomach contents requires extraordinary conditions. After Borealopelta died, its body must have been buried quickly, likely carried into deeper waters by a river or a coastal current. There, it settled into fine sediment where oxygen levels were low and scavengers were scarce. Over millions of years, minerals replaced the soft tissues, sealing the stomach's contents inside like a time capsule. The fact that they survived at all is a geological accident of extraordinary proportions. The value of this fossil goes beyond its rarity. It shows us not only what one dinosaur ate, but how it interacted with its environment, and how that environment itself was evolving. It connects ancient diets to broader ecological processes, from wildfire cycles to the rise and fall of plant groups. It shows how life is always in conversation with the world around it, shaped by what grows from the ground and what grazes upon it. Borealopelta's final meal is not just a trace of digestion, it is a record of life as it was lived in a long-vanished world, a glimpse into a moment that might otherwise have been lost. The plants it consumed, the fire-scarred landscape it roamed, and the choices it made while feeding are all preserved within that single stomach. In the stillness of the rock, the story of its last day continues to unfold, written in the leaves it once chewed and swallowed more than 100 million years ago. In the mid-1990s, a young paleontologist named Mary Schweitzer peered into a microscope and saw something that, by all accounts, should not have existed. She had been studying the thigh bone of a Tyrannosaurus rex, an apex predator that once thundered across ancient floodplains more than 66 million years ago. The fossil had been unearthed from the dusty badlands of Montana, its heavy mineralized surface exactly what scientists expected from a specimen of such age. But hidden within it was something no one had ever imagined would survive the long, crushing passage of time. The discovery came about almost by accident. While attempting to move the massive femur from the excavation site, the fossil cracked open, exposing its interior. At first, it was a frustration. Fossils are fragile, and a break could mean losing precious information. But Schweitzer's curiosity led her to examine the interior more closely. She dissolved a portion of the fossil in a weak acid, a standard procedure to separate minerals from organic material. What remained was anything but standard. Under the microscope, she saw thin, flexible tubes that could be stretched and snapped back into shape. They were hollow and branching, resembling blood vessels, and inside them were small, round structures that looked eerily like red blood cells. The scientific world was skeptical. For more than a century, paleontology had been built on a single assumption: soft tissue does not survive deep time. When a creature dies, its organic components decay quickly, leaving only the hard parts, bones, teeth, shells, which might, under ideal conditions, mineralize and fossilize. Proteins, blood vessels, and cells were thought to vanish within thousands of years, far too fragile to persist for millions. Yet here, sealed inside the femur of a dinosaur that died before humans even existed as an idea, was evidence to the contrary. Schweitzer's team repeated the experiments, and the results held. The flexible tissues were real. Chemical analysis revealed traces of collagen, a key structural protein found in connective tissue. The discovery was nothing short of revolutionary. Collagen is a complex, delicate molecule. Until then, no scientist believed it could endure more than a few millennia, let alone tens of millions of years. Its presence shattered long-held assumptions about the limits of preservation and forced researchers to rethink what fossilization truly meant. The question, of course, was how such material could have survived. Scientists now think the key lies in the chemistry of blood itself. When an organism dies, iron from hemoglobin, the molecule that carries oxygen in blood, is released into surrounding tissues. Iron is highly reactive, and Schweitzer hypothesized that it might trigger chemical reactions that cross-link proteins, effectively locking them in place and shielding them from the normal processes of decay. This iron-induced stabilization, combined with rapid burial and the exclusion of oxygen, could create a microenvironment within the bone where molecules are protected for extraordinary lengths of time. What this means for paleontology is profound. For the first time, scientists could study the biological materials of dinosaurs directly, rather than relying solely on bone structure and external features. Collagen sequences recovered from the Tyrannosaurus rex showed striking similarities to those in modern birds, lending powerful molecular evidence to the idea that birds are living dinosaurs. This was more than a structural resemblance. It was a chemical signature linking the ancient past to the present. The discovery also opened the door to a field once thought to belong only to the realm of science fiction: paleogenetics. If proteins could endure for tens of millions of years, then perhaps, in rare cases, fragments of DNA or other biomolecules might too. While intact DNA has yet to be confirmed from such ancient fossils, researchers have detected tiny molecular remnants that hint at life's original blueprints. These traces could eventually reveal information about growth rates, physiology, metabolism, and even immune systems, aspects of dinosaur biology once thought forever lost. The implications stretch far beyond a single fossil. Schweitzer's findings prompted scientists to re-examine other specimens long assumed to be fully mineralized. In some, they found additional traces of preserved proteins, soft tissue structures, and even microscopic remnants of cells. This suggested that molecular preservation might be more common than anyone had realized, not universal, but possible in the right circumstances. Each discovery adds a new layer to our understanding of how organic material can endure the crushing pressure and immense timescales of Earth's deep history. These breakthroughs have transformed how scientists approach the fossil record. Fossils are no longer seen merely as stone imprints of ancient bones, but as time capsules that might contain the very building blocks of life itself. They offer a molecular bridge across epochs, connecting the physiology of extinct creatures to that of their living descendants. They even hold potential for reconstructing aspects of ancient ecosystems, revealing how creatures interacted with their environment, not just through anatomy, but through the chemistry of their bodies. Inside that fractured Tyrannosaurus bone, the remnants of ancient life still linger. Blood vessels that once pulsed with oxygen, protein strands that once gave structure to flesh, and molecular echoes of a creature that lived and breathed in a vanished world. They are not fossils in the traditional sense. They are whispers of biology itself, preserved against all odds, rewriting what we thought time was capable of erasing. And with every new discovery, they pull the distant past a little closer until the line between what once lived and what still lives begins to blur. In the late 1990s, a team of paleontologists working in South Dakota uncovered a fossil that would transform what scientists knew about dinosaur biology. It was not the skull of a fearsome predator or the skeleton of a towering giant, but the remains of a modest herbivore called the Celosaurus. This dinosaur, only about 3 meters long, lived during the final days of the Cretaceous period, grazing among ferns and cycads in the warm, wet lowlands that covered much of North America. Its name means marvelous lizard, and for most of its existence, it might have seemed ordinary, small, nimble, and unremarkable compared to the massive creatures that shared its world. Yet the fossil discovered in the sandstone did something no other Thistlosaurus ever had. Inside its chest, sealed away by deep time, was the preserved outline of a heart. The fossil became known as willow. At first, researchers assumed the dense oval structure in its rib cage was a concretion, a lump of minerals that sometimes forms inside decaying carcasses. But closer examination revealed something far more intriguing. Detailed imaging showed 4 distinct chambers, thick walls, and branching passageways. This was not a random mineral deposit. It was a heart, preserved in stone, and that single discovery carried implications far beyond the anatomy of one small dinosaur. The internal structure of Willow's heart was unlike what scientists had expected. Reptiles today, such as crocodiles and lizards, typically have 2 or 3 heart chambers, which mix oxygen-rich and oxygen-poor blood together. That system is efficient enough for cold-blooded animals with slower metabolisms, but it limits how much oxygen their bodies can deliver to their tissues. Birds and mammals, on the other hand, have 4-chambered hearts that keep the 2 blood flows separate, supplying their cells with a constant stream of oxygen and fueling high levels of activity. Willow's heart seemed to belong to this second category. It was powerful, complex, and built for a life that required more energy than scientists had long believed dinosaurs possessed. This evidence hinted at something deeper. If the Celosaurus had a 4-chambered heart, it likely also had a faster metabolism than modern reptiles. It would have needed a steady supply of oxygen to power its muscles, allowing it to move more efficiently and stay active for longer periods. This aligns with other emerging evidence from bone growth patterns and respiratory structures, suggesting that many dinosaurs were warm-blooded, or at the very least, far more metabolically active than once assumed. Instead of lumbering, sluggish reptiles, they may have been agile, energetic creatures with physiologies closer to those of birds and mammals. The implications extended beyond physiology. A more powerful cardiovascular system could help explain how dinosaurs achieved such rapid growth rates, reaching adult sizes in a fraction of the time it takes modern reptiles. It could also account for their dominance over terrestrial ecosystems for more than 150 million years. Sustained activity would have allowed them to migrate vast distances in search of food and water, evade predators, and maintain complex social behaviors like herding or nesting. Even for a small herbivore like the Celosaurus, the advantages of a high-performance circulatory system would have shaped every part of its life. To study Willow's heart without damaging it, scientists turned to advanced imaging techniques. Computed tomography, or CT scanning, allowed them to peer inside the fossil in 3 dimensions. What they saw confirmed their suspicions. The preserved structure showed signs of valves and major blood vessels branching out toward the rest of the body. Differences in density hinted at the presence of muscular walls that once contracted rhythmically, pumping blood through the animal's body. It was a frozen record of circulation, captured not in ink or memory, but in mineral and stone. This level of detail also allowed scientists to make comparisons with living animals. The similarities between Willow's heart and those of modern birds were striking, adding another piece of evidence to the growing consensus that birds are the direct descendants of theropod dinosaurs. It also highlighted the evolutionary transition from reptilian physiology to the more complex, high-performance systems seen in birds and mammals. Dinosaurs, it seemed, were not an evolutionary dead end. They were part of a lineage that continued to evolve, adapt, and thrive in new forms long after most of their kind vanished. The discovery also raised questions about how such a delicate organ could survive for tens of millions of years. Rapid burial, mineral-rich groundwater, and a lack of oxygen likely combined to slow decay and allow minerals to infiltrate the tissue before it completely broke down. But beyond the technical explanation lay a more profound realization. The fossil record was capable of preserving far more than bones and shells. It could, under the right circumstances, capture the inner workings of life itself. Willow's heart remains one of the most remarkable examples of that possibility. Encased in rock, it carries a record of a living system that once beat in time with the rhythms of a Cretaceous landscape. It tells us that dinosaurs were not simply scaled-up reptiles, but highly adapted, dynamic creatures whose biology laid the groundwork for the birds that fill our skies today. And in that small, stone-encased chamber, it preserves not just an organ, but a clue to the vitality that once pulsed through a vanished world, a heartbeat from the past, still echoing across the gulf of time. In the vast and ever-growing archive of dinosaur discoveries, most of the attention naturally goes to the spectacular. Towering skeletons displayed in museums, skulls lined with serrated teeth, or footprints stamped into ancient riverbeds tend to dominate the headlines. Yet, some of the most revealing discoveries are far subtler. They are the ones that do not reshape our view of a species' size or diet, but instead illuminate the hidden details of how these creatures lived. One such discovery came from an animal that would never have made front-page news for its size or ferocity. It was a small, beaked herbivore no larger than a Labrador retriever, a creature called Pterosaurus, which roamed the forests of Asia over 100 million years ago. And preserved within its fossilized remains was something scientists had sought for decades, the only known dinosaur cloaca. Psittacosaurus, whose name means parrot lizard, was an early cousin of the horned dinosaurs that would later include giants like Triceratops. It walked on 2 legs, fed on ferns and cycads, and likely lived a relatively quiet life compared to the predators of its age. Its fossils are abundant in parts of China and Mongolia, where ancient lake beds and volcanic ashfalls captured and preserved countless remains. Yet, among the hundreds of specimens that paleontologists have studied, one stood out. It was not because of its bones, which were typical of the species, but because it contained a structure no one had ever seen in a dinosaur before: a perfectly preserved cloaca. The cloaca is one of nature's most multifunctional anatomical designs. It is a single external opening that serves as the exit point for three internal systems: the digestive tract, the urinary tract, and the reproductive organs. Birds, reptiles, and amphibians all use a cloaca, and through it they pass waste, lay eggs, and mate. In mammals, these processes are separated into distinct openings, but in the lineage that links reptiles, dinosaurs, and modern birds, the cloaca has remained the standard for hundreds of millions of years. Paleontologists had long assumed that dinosaurs shared this feature, but without direct fossil evidence, it was impossible to say for sure. That changed when the Psittacosaurus specimen was carefully prepared and examined. The fossil was uncovered in the rich, fine-grained sediments of northeastern China, where conditions for preservation are exceptional. When researchers began studying it, they noticed an unusual structure near the base of the tail. It was elongated, not circular, and surrounded by preserved skin and pigmentation patterns. Its shape closely matched that of a crocodile's cloaca, which is itself a legacy of a common ancestor shared with dinosaurs. This was the first time scientists could confirm, without doubt, that dinosaurs possessed a cloaca and that its basic structure aligned with what we see in their living relatives. The anatomy revealed by the fossil was more than just a curiosity. Its elongated shape suggested internal fertilization, a system in which sperm is transferred inside the cloacal cavity, rather than through external fertilization like that seen in some amphibians and fish. This is the same method used by both crocodiles and birds today. In other words, the way Psittacosaurus reproduced was not a primitive reptilian throwback, but a complex internal process that has remained nearly unchanged for more than 100 million years. It provided a direct line of continuity from the reproductive biology of ancient dinosaurs to that of the birds outside our windows. The preserved tissue around the cloaca also revealed intriguing details. Pigmentation patterns and glandular structures hinted that the area might have had functions beyond simple excretion or reproduction. In many modern reptiles and birds, specialized glands near the cloaca produce scents used for marking territory or attracting mates. Some birds even display brightly colored skin around the area during courtship. Although scientists cannot know for certain, the preserved anatomy of Psittacosaurus suggests that dinosaurs may have used their cloacas for similar purposes, weaving reproductive signaling into the most fundamental aspects of their anatomy. The structure also tells scientists about the broader evolutionary story of these animals. The cloaca links dinosaurs directly to two groups that still exist today: birds, which are their descendants, and crocodilians, which are their closest living relatives. Both use the same multi-purpose system, and both rely on similar internal processes for reproduction and egg-laying. The fossil shows that this shared design is not a recent adaptation but an ancient trait, passed down through deep time without significant change. It is a rare glimpse of anatomical continuity spanning hundreds of millions of years. The preservation of the Psittacosaurus cloaca was no ordinary event. Soft tissues like this usually decay within days after death, disappearing long before fossilization can occur. But in this case, a perfect storm of conditions worked together. The animal likely died near a body of water where fine sediment quickly buried it. The rapid burial sealed it from oxygen and scavengers, halting decomposition. Over millions of years, minerals slowly replaced the decaying tissues, preserving their shape in exquisite detail. Under a microscope, scientists could even see the faint folds and textures of the original skin, as if the creature's final moments had been paused in time. What makes this discovery so important is not just its uniqueness, but its breadth of insight. With a single fossil, paleontologists gained direct evidence of how dinosaurs excreted waste, how they reproduced, and how their anatomy linked them to animals still living today. It showed that a structure so small and easily overlooked can hold answers to some of the biggest questions about evolution and continuity. Hidden in the stone was not just an anatomical feature, but a connection across deep time, one that ties a small Cretaceous herbivore to the birds that glide through modern skies and the reptiles that bask on riverbanks. Through the cloaca of Psittacosaurus, the story of life's enduring blueprint becomes visible, a reminder that even the most ancient worlds still echo in the bodies of the living. Life's story is often told through the grand struggles of the visible world: predator and prey, survival and extinction, growth and adaptation. But beneath those sweeping dramas lies another, far quieter force that has shaped evolution for hundreds of millions of years. It is a story of hidden invasions and microscopic wars, of organisms that live not alongside their hosts, but within them. These are the parasites, the thieves, the hitchhikers, the invisible influencers of life. And though they rarely leave behind traces of their presence, on rare and extraordinary occasions, they too are preserved in the fossil record, revealing their ancient roles in shaping the world. One of the most haunting examples of this comes from a piece of amber formed nearly 100 million years ago in what is now Myanmar. Trapped inside that golden droplet is a scene so intimate it feels almost intrusive, a tiny tick still clinging to a delicate dinosaur feather. The feather belonged to a small, bird-like theropod that once flitted through Cretaceous forests, and the tick, its body slightly swollen, had been feeding when the resin flowed over them both. The moment froze in time, preserving not only the parasite, but also the evidence of its relationship with its host. It shows that even in the age of dinosaurs, blood-feeding parasites had already adapted to exploit their hosts, shaping their behavior, their health, and even their evolution. This ancient snapshot tells us more than just who fed on whom. It shows that the long evolutionary arms race between parasite and host, a contest of adaptation and counter-adaptation, was already underway deep in prehistory. Hosts evolved defenses like thicker skin, faster immune responses, or elaborate grooming behaviors. Parasites respond with new strategies to pierce, cling, or evade detection. Each adaptation by one side forces change in the other. Over time, this endless push and pull leaves fingerprints on anatomy, physiology, and even social behavior. The tick and feather in amber are evidence that this struggle, which continues in every forest and bloodstream today, has been shaping life for far longer than humans have walked the earth. Other fossils reveal parasitism working from the inside out. In ancient fish fossils, paleontologists have found the twisted remains of parasitic worms still curled within the abdominal cavities, where they once siphoned nutrients from their hosts. These internal parasites, often invisible in life, leave subtle but significant marks in the fossil record, signs of swelling, bone deformities, or even changes in growth patterns caused by the stress of infestation. In one extraordinary case, fossilized coprolites, ancient droppings contained the eggs of intestinal worms, offering a direct window into the diseases that afflicted creatures hundreds of millions of years ago. The ecological consequences of these interactions were profound. Parasites are not mere passengers on the evolutionary journey. They are active participants in shaping it. By weakening some individuals and sparing others, they influence which genes survive to the next generation. They can alter the size and structure of populations, reduce reproductive success, and even shift entire food webs. A predator weakened by blood loss might fail to catch its prey, A herd struck by a parasite-borne disease might change its migration routes, reshaping plant communities along the way. These ripple effects, playing out over millions of years, helped shape the balance of prehistoric ecosystems just as surely as climate change or asteroid impacts did. Sometimes, parasites themselves evolve into something more complex. Certain relationships captured in fossils show not just exploitation, but the beginnings of symbiosis, where parasite and host both benefit. In one marine fossil from the Devonian period, tiny crustaceans once thought to be parasites appear to have fed on detritus around the gills of ancient fish, cleaning them of harmful buildup in exchange for nutrients. These partnerships, fragile and opportunistic at first, could eventually evolve into more stable forms of cooperation, demonstrating how parasitism and symbiosis are points along the same evolutionary spectrum. The study of ancient parasites has also begun to change how scientists think about prehistoric disease. Many modern parasites act as vectors, carrying pathogens from one host to another. Ticks spread Lyme disease, mosquitoes transmit malaria, and fleas once helped unleash the Black Death. If blood-feeding parasites existed in the age of dinosaurs, and the fossil evidence suggests they did, then prehistoric ecosystems must also have been shaped by disease outbreaks. Pathogens may have swept through populations of herbivores, predators, or even early birds, influencing migration, reproductive success, and survival on a massive scale. Though we may never identify the specific pathogens involved, the presence of parasites is a clear sign that disease was a fundamental force in deep time. Even the smallest of these discoveries has enormous implications. Fossilized copepods clinging to the gills of ancient fish reveal the pressures that shaped aquatic ecosystems. A larval fly found inside the body of another insect shows that parasitic strategies were already diverse tens of millions of years ago. And each of these fossils tells a part of a much larger story, one in which life is not merely a contest of tooth and claw, but also a series of hidden, internal battles fought silently across generations. In the stillness of amber and stone, these tiny creatures whisper reminders of a truth as old as life itself. Survival has never been only about strength or size. It has also been about endurance, adaptation, and the relentless dance between those who feed and those who resist. That dance, unfolding invisibly within ancient forests, rivers, and seas, shaped the world we know today, and its echoes still ripple through every living thing. In the heart of an ancient forest, a tree once suffered a small wound, maybe a branch snapped in a storm, or an insect chewed too deeply beneath its bark. In response, the tree released a golden, sticky resin that oozed from the break and began to drip slowly down its trunk. Grain by grain, it gathered fragments of the living world, pollen drifting on the wind, grains of soil, and the delicate bodies of tiny creatures that landed on its surface and could not escape. Over time, that resin hardened into amber, and then, over millions of years, it was buried, compressed, and transformed. What began as a tree's defense became something far more remarkable, a window into a vanished world, a fragment of time that stopped flowing and refused to start again. Amber is one of the most unique forms of preservation on Earth because it captures life in astonishing detail. Unlike fossils that are pressed into stone or bones that reveal only the hard framework of a body, amber preserves living things as they truly were. Wings, hairs, eyes, even the most fragile membranes can remain intact inside its golden shell. Tiny organisms that would normally decay in hours are sealed in a kind of biological stasis, suspended mid-movement and untouched by the passage of time. It is as if the moment they lived was simply paused, waiting patiently to be seen again. The beauty of amber is that it does not just preserve the shapes of creatures, but their stories. A fly caught mid-flight is frozen, with its wings still outstretched. A spider poised over a web remains forever in the act of hunting. In one extraordinary specimen, a small lizard is preserved with its jaws clamped around the body of an insect, locked forever in the moment of capture. These fossils are not snapshots of death, like bones scattered on ancient ground. They are snapshots of life itself, of action, interaction, and behavior that would otherwise be erased. Some of the most famous discoveries from amber come from insects, which are often the first to become trapped in the sticky resin. Ants, bees, and beetles preserved from the Cretaceous period show us that many insect groups alive today already existed more than 100 million years ago. In one piece, a mosquito remains with its abdomen still swollen from a recent meal, containing microscopic traces of ancient blood. That small droplet holds molecular information about the animal it fed on, information that could never survive in a traditional fossil. It is a glimpse not only into the anatomy of the insect, but also into the wider web of life it was part of. Amber also captures delicate botanical details that stone rarely does. Tiny pollen grains cling to insect legs, revealing the plants that once flourished in those ancient forests. Spores from fungi and microscopic filaments from algae are sometimes preserved too, offering a view into the ecosystems that surrounded the trapped organisms. In one extraordinary discovery, a flower was found perfectly preserved in amber, its petals still intact, allowing scientists to study its reproductive structures in 3 dimensions. It looked as though it had just fallen from a branch, even though it had been sealed away for nearly 100 million years. Occasionally, amber captures glimpses of larger and more complex life. One piece contains a fragment of a small dinosaur's tail, complete with soft tissue and delicate feathers that still display their original structure. The arrangement of those feathers revealed how they might have been used not for flight, but perhaps for insulation or display. In another case, a coiled snake embryo, no longer than a matchstick, was found encased within amber, its tiny vertebrae preserved in exquisite detail. These discoveries remind us that amber is not only a record of insects and plants, but of entire ecosystems, from the smallest spore to the youngest reptile. What makes amber even more remarkable is that it preserves not just shape, but chemistry. Within its airtight chamber, organic molecules such as proteins and pigments can sometimes survive for tens of millions of years. Fragments of DNA, though rare and heavily degraded, have been detected in a few specimens, offering the possibility of tracing evolutionary lineages at the molecular level. Pigment cells in feathers or insect eyes have even allowed scientists to infer original colors, adding another layer of detail to the portraits painted by these fossils. Some of the most captivating pieces of amber preserve not just individual organisms, but interactions between them. A spider caught mid-hunt, a group of ants surrounding their larvae, or a pollen-covered beetle moments after feeding these tiny frozen scenes show behaviors that bones could never reveal. They let scientists reconstruct ancient ecological relationships, how insects pollinated plants, how predators stalked prey, how creatures competed, cooperated, and lived alongside one another. Even the smallest inclusions can hold vast scientific value. Tiny bubbles of air, sealed alongside the organisms, have preserved samples of ancient atmospheres, helping researchers understand the composition of Earth's air tens of millions of years ago. Resin chemistry itself reveals what kinds of trees once grew in those forests and the climates they endured. In this way, Amber is not just a record of life, but a record of the environment that sustained it. Each piece of amber is a time capsule, a sealed world where time does not pass. It is more than a fossil. It is a preserved moment, a breath, a movement, a heartbeat from an age that would otherwise be gone forever. And when held to the light, it does not simply show us what life once looked like. It shows us how life once was. 66 million years ago, on a warm spring day, the world ended. It did not end everywhere at once, and not every living thing understood what was happening, but in the space of a few hours, Earth was transformed forever. In the quiet shallows of a prehistoric river valley in what is now North Dakota, life moved as it always had. Streams flowed lazily into a larger inland sea. Insects hummed above the water's surface. Small mammals scurried through the undergrowth, and fish darted through currents beneath the shade of ferns and cycads. There was no warning that a catastrophe was unfolding far beyond the horizon. Thousands of kilometers away, a rock the size of a small city was falling toward the planet. It had been orbiting the sun for eons, a silent fragment of the early solar system. When it finally struck, it slammed into the shallow waters near what is now Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula with unimaginable force. In a fraction of a second, the impact released more energy than billions of atomic bombs. The blast vaporized rock, boiled oceans, and hurled molten debris high into the atmosphere. Shock waves raced through the crust, triggering earthquakes and tsunamis. The sky ignited with superheated particles, turning day into night. At Tanis, over 3,000 kilometers from the impact site, the first signs of disaster came minutes later. The ground trembled as seismic waves rippled outward, shaking forests and stirring riverbeds. The water in the river began to slosh violently, forming massive seiches, standing waves caused by the distant impact's energy. These waves swept across the floodplain, tearing apart vegetation and dislodging entire trees. Fish that had been swimming peacefully were suddenly tossed into chaotic currents, their world turned upside down in moments. Then, something strange began to fall from the sky. Tiny glass-like beads, no bigger than grains of sand, rained down through the atmosphere. They were called tektites, formed when molten rock blasted into the air by the impact cooled and solidified as it fell back to Earth. These fiery particles fell by the billions, and many were still hot when they landed. They set forests alight and boiled the surface of lakes and rivers. In the waters of Tanis, fish gasped and strained to breathe as tektites clogged their gills. Many of these fish died within minutes, their bodies drifting downward into the sediment below. It is this exact moment, not just the aftermath of the impact, but the minutes and hours immediately following it, that the Tanis fossil site has preserved with eerie precision. Discovered in the early 21st century, the site is unlike any other known fossil bed. It captures a single catastrophic event in astonishing detail, a snapshot of the day the dinosaurs' world collapsed. Layer upon layer of sediment records the sequence of events almost minute by minute, from the arrival of the first seismic waves to the choking rain of debris. Among the most striking fossils are those of fish, many still perfectly articulated, their bodies undisturbed by scavengers or decay. In their gills are hundreds of tiny glass spherules, physical evidence of the tektite rain they encountered while still alive. These delicate particles, locked in place by the sediment that quickly buried them, provide an extraordinary forensic record. Scientists can even trace their chemical composition back to the impact site itself, linking the Tanis fossils directly to the Chicxulub asteroid. Other fossils at Tanis tell equally vivid stories. Logs and tree trunks are tangled in chaotic arrangements, suggesting they were swept in by powerful waves. Dinosaur bones are scattered among them, some belonging to animals that may have died during the event itself. Tiny bits of amber contain shocked mineral grains formed under intense pressure at the moment of impact. The sediments themselves are layered in a way that reveals a rapid sequence of deposition, showing that the entire fossil bed formed in just a few hours. The precision of this record is what makes Tanis so remarkable. Most fossil sites capture broad spans of time, thousands, sometimes millions of years, compressed into a few meters of rock. Tanis is different. It records a single day, possibly a single afternoon, frozen in stone. The events it preserves happened so quickly that there was no time for scavengers to disturb the bodies, no time for sediment to be reworked by rivers or wind. It is as if the world was paused mid-disaster and sealed away for eternity. The fish with glass beads in their gills are among the most haunting pieces of evidence. They were alive when the rain of molten debris began, breathing in water filled with falling particles from a sky on fire. Their final breaths tell the story of a world undergoing sudden, violent transformation. They died not weeks or years after the impact, but within the first hour, perhaps even the first 30 minutes of the catastrophe. As the hours wore on, darkness deepened around the planet. Fires burned unchecked, and ash began to fall like snow. Temperatures plummeted as sunlight was blocked by a thick veil of dust and aerosols. Photosynthesis slowed, then stopped. Ecosystems collapsed from the bottom up. Within months, the food chains that had supported the dinosaurs for over 150 million years had unraveled. But at Tanis, that collapse is not the focus. Instead, the site preserves the moment just before everything changed, the violent transition from a thriving world to one on the brink of extinction. It is the closest scientists have come to witnessing the event that ended the age of dinosaurs, not through speculation or simulation, but through the real, physical evidence of living things caught in the first breath of disaster and in the layered sediments of a quiet river valley. That terrible day still lingers, recorded with a clarity that time itself could not erase. Beneath the shadow of ancient cliffs and beside the quiet shores of forgotten lakes, a secret once lay hidden beneath the earth. It was not the skeleton of a predator or the teeth of a giant, but something far more delicate, the fragile beginnings of life itself. For millions of years, the skies had been ruled by pterosaurs, creatures whose wings stretched wider than any bird alive today. They were the first vertebrates to master flight, soaring over oceans, nesting along coastal cliffs, and gliding between the towering conifers of the Mesozoic world. Yet for all their grandeur, one mystery remained unsolved for centuries: how they began their lives. Pterosaur bones are rare. Their hollow, lightweight skeletons were built for flight, and they often broke or disappeared before they could fossilize. Their eggs, however, were even rarer. Unlike the hard, calcium-rich shells of bird eggs, pterosaur eggs were soft and leathery, more like those of modern reptiles, such as lizards and turtles. These flexible shells offered advantages in life, but they also decayed quickly after death, leaving almost no trace behind. For generations, paleontologists could only speculate about how these flying reptiles reproduced, how their eggs developed, and what their hatchlings were like. That changed with a remarkable discovery in the dry, wind-blown desert of northwestern China. There, scientists uncovered an extraordinary fossil bed containing more than 200 pterosaur eggs, each preserved in three-dimensional detail. They had been buried rapidly by fine sediments near an ancient lake, protected from the elements long enough to mineralize instead of rot. Many still held their tiny occupants, curled inside in various stages of development. This site offered the first direct glimpse into a pterosaur nesting ground and opened an entirely new chapter in the story of their lives. The eggs were small, no larger than those of a chicken, and their leathery shells told scientists much about how they were laid and protected. Pterosaurs likely buried their eggs in soft, damp sand or soil, relying on the warmth of the ground rather than their own bodies to incubate them. This is a strategy still used by many reptiles today, including crocodiles and sea turtles. It protected the eggs from drying out and shielded them from predators, while also creating stable conditions for development. The consistency of this approach suggests that pterosaurs, despite their aerial mastery, relied heavily on the earth for the earliest and most vulnerable stage of their offspring's lives. Inside the eggs, the fossilized embryos revealed even more astonishing details. Some were only partially formed, their bones soft and flexible. Others were nearly ready to hatch, their wings already well developed, their muscles strong and defined. These advanced embryos suggested that pterosaurs may have been precocial, meaning that hatchlings could move and perhaps even fly shortly after emerging from their eggs. If true, this would set them apart from most modern birds, whose chicks often remain in the nest for extended periods, dependent on parental care. The scale of the discovery also hinted at how these animals organized their reproductive lives. The sheer number of eggs suggested that pterosaurs nested in colonies, gathering in large groups to lay their clutches in the same area. This behavior is common among many modern reptiles and seabirds, where collective nesting helps reduce predation risk. It also implies that these creatures might have returned to the same nesting sites year after year, following ancient migratory paths back to the places where they themselves had hatched. Elsewhere, in Argentina, another fossil site added new layers to the story. There, researchers found pterosaur eggs scattered among the bones of juveniles and adults, some in clusters and others spaced apart. The embryos inside were at different stages of development, suggesting that females did not lay their eggs all at once, but over an extended breeding season. This strategy, seen in many modern reptiles, would have spread the risk of environmental disasters or predation, increasing the chances that at least some offspring would survive. The eggshells themselves held further clues. Under a microscope, their structure revealed multiple fibrous layers designed for flexibility and strength. This architecture allowed the shells to expand as the embryos grew inside, reducing the risk of rupture. Tiny pores in the shell allowed gas exchange, supplying oxygen and removing carbon dioxide, just as in modern reptile and bird eggs. Chemical traces preserved within the shells also hinted at how minerals and nutrients were transferred from the parent's body to the growing embryo, a process that shows remarkable continuity with the way eggs develop in animals. Today, even the posture of the embryos told a story. Many were curled tightly with their heads tucked under their wings, a position strikingly similar to that seen in developing reptilian embryos today. This shared posture reflects deep evolutionary roots, stretching back over hundreds of millions of years, linking the earliest flying reptiles to their distant modern relatives. The discovery of these rare egg clutches has transformed our understanding of pterosaur life. They reveal that, despite their mastery of the skies, these animals followed ancient, earthbound rhythms when it came to reproduction. They laid their eggs in carefully chosen places, buried them in the ground for protection, and entrusted the warmth of the soil to nurture their young. Inside those thin, leathery shells, complex biological processes unfolded the growth of bones and wings, the development of muscles, and the preparations for flight. Each egg is a tiny time capsule, a record of beginnings that are otherwise lost to time. They capture not just the story of individual hatchlings, but the continuity of life itself, from the age of flying reptiles to the birds that glide above us today. And within their delicate shells, the echoes of ancient skies still linger. In the heart of Montana's rugged landscape, a stretch of badlands once lay beneath a warm, seasonal sun. Millions of years ago, it was a broad, grassy plain dotted with streams and shaded by forests of conifers and ferns. Herds of duck-billed dinosaurs grazed there, their movements stirring the air and sending ripples across shallow ponds. And in one quiet corner of this ancient world, something remarkable was happening, not a battle between predator and prey, but something gentler and far more profound. Here, dinosaurs were raising their young. The discovery of this story began in the 1970s, when paleontologist Jack Horner and his team uncovered a site that would forever change how scientists thought about dinosaur behavior. They named it Egg Mountain. Hidden beneath layers of sandstone and silt, the site preserved the remains of a vast nesting colony belonging to a dinosaur called Maiasaura, the good mother lizard. This plant-eating hadrosaur roamed North America about 76 million years ago, living in large herds that moved with the seasons. Adults could grow as long as 9 meters and weigh several tons, but the most astonishing evidence they left behind was not their size. It was their devotion to their young. Spread across the site were hundreds of fossilized nests, each a shallow bowl pressed into the ancient earth. Many held clusters of eggs arranged in neat circles. Others contained the tiny skeletons of hatchlings, their bones delicate and incomplete, still developing long after hatching. Some were curled as they would have been inside their shells, but many were larger, showing signs of growth that could only have occurred after birth. Their limbs were weak, their bones too fragile to support their bodies. These were not independent hatchlings that scrambled away moments after emerging. They had stayed in the nest, reliant on the care of their parents. The evidence suggested a level of parental investment that few had imagined for dinosaurs. Around the nests, layers of disturbed soil and trampled sediment revealed that adults returned repeatedly, possibly bringing food. Worn teeth on the tiny skeletons hinted that young Maiasaura were fed plant material rather than foraging for themselves. This alone was revolutionary. It suggested that these dinosaurs actively nurtured their offspring, visiting the nest to feed them and protecting them during their most vulnerable weeks of life. Such behavior was long thought to belong only to birds and mammals, yet here it was, written in stone, millions of years before either had fully risen to dominance. The organization of the nesting ground itself told another story. The nests were spaced at regular intervals, each separated by only a few meters, just enough distance for an adult to crouch above without disturbing its neighbors. This pattern mirrored that of many modern seabirds, which gather in vast colonies to protect their eggs and share collective vigilance against predators. It suggested that Maiasaura, too, nested in large groups, coordinating their reproductive cycles and relying on strength in numbers to keep their young safe. The sheer scale of this ancient nursery hinted at complex social structures where cooperation and collective defense were as vital as individual parental care. Further evidence lay beyond the nests. Fossilized trackways in nearby rock showed the movements of juvenile Maiasaura traveling together in what scientists believe were nursery herds. These groups of young dinosaurs, likely too old for the nest but not yet fully grown, seemed to have stayed together for protection while adults foraged nearby. Such behavior is still seen in many modern animals, from wildebeest to penguins, where young individuals cluster together for safety, relying on the watchful eyes of adults to guard them from danger. It painted a picture of a life cycle organized around shared responsibility and communal care, a world in which survival depended not just on strength, but on cooperation. Even the growth patterns of Maiasaura bones added to the story. Studies revealed that these dinosaurs grew rapidly, reaching near adult size in only a few years. This explosive growth required enormous amounts of food and energy, especially in the early months of life. Such demands would have been impossible without sustained parental care and an organized social structure that ensured the young were fed and protected. In this way, Maiasaura's success as a species was deeply tied to its ability to invest in the next generation. The discovery of Egg Mountain shattered old assumptions about dinosaurs as cold, indifferent reptiles that abandoned their eggs and left their hatchlings to fend for themselves. Instead, it revealed a world where some dinosaurs were attentive parents, where they returned to their nests day after day, where they gathered in large colonies for mutual protection, and where their young grew under the watchful care of a herd. It was a picture of social complexity that connected them more closely to birds than to any reptile alive today. Each nest, each tiny skeleton, and each fossilized footprint is a chapter in that story. Together, they reveal a side of dinosaur life that rarely survives in the fossil record, a side defined not by competition or violence, but by care, cooperation, and the unbroken thread of life stretching from one generation to the next. Through these ancient nurseries, we see not just the biology of dinosaurs, but the social worlds they built, the bonds they formed, and the strategies they evolved to give their young a future. In their quiet persistence, those long-buried nests speak of a truth that crosses millions of years. Survival is rarely a solitary effort. It is a shared endeavor, passed from parent to offspring, from herd to herd, from age to age. Beneath the towering peaks of the Canadian Rockies, high in the wilderness of British Columbia, lies a layer of dark, fine-grained shale unlike any other on Earth. To the casual eye, it looks unremarkable, just a stack of thin rock sheets embedded in a mountain wall. But within those sheets are some of the most exquisite fossils ever discovered. Bodies that should have vanished without a trace hundreds of millions of years ago are preserved here with astonishing detail. Eyes, skin, gills, even the soft filaments of tentacles. This place is the Burgess Shale, one of the most extraordinary fossil deposits in the world, and it is often called the Pompeii of prehistoric oceans. The Burgess Shale formed more than 500 million years ago during a period known as the Cambrian Explosion. It was a time when life was diversifying at a pace never seen before. Creatures of wildly different shapes and sizes filled the seas. Animals with spiny armor, translucent bodies, multiple eyes, and unfamiliar limbs. Many of them were evolutionary experiments, lineages that would flourish for a few million years before disappearing forever. Most had no bones or shells, so their bodies should have dissolved quickly after death, leaving no evidence they ever existed. Yet here they are, preserved with such delicacy that even their smallest structures can still be studied today. The secret of this preservation lies in the unique conditions that created the Burgess Shale. These animals lived near the edge of a steep underwater slope, where fine mud drifted down from shallower waters. Occasionally, a sudden underwater avalanche of sediment buried entire communities alive, sealing them away from oxygen and scavengers. In this oxygen-poor environment, decay slowed to a crawl, and mineral-rich waters replaced soft tissues molecule by molecule before they could rot. The result was an almost magical preservation of life in 3 dimensions, a complete snapshot of an ancient ecosystem frozen in place for 500 million years. The Burgess Shale is not alone in this. Similar fossil deposits, known as Lagerstätten, exist in a few rare places around the world. Each offers a unique window into a vanished world. In Germany, the Solnhofen limestone has preserved delicate impressions of Jurassic life, including the famous Archaeopteryx, with its feathers intact. In China's Yixian Formation, tiny mammals, feathered dinosaurs, and blooming plants appear as if pressed between the pages of stone. In the Chengjiang biota of southern China, even older than the Burgess Shale, soft-bodied Cambrian creatures lie preserved in astonishing detail. These sites are the rarest of all fossil deposits, capturing not just skeletons but entire ecosystems, predators and prey, plants and microbes, interactions frozen mid-motion. What makes Lagerstätten so scientifically valuable is the kind of information they reveal. Most fossil sites record only the hard parts of organisms: bones, shells, teeth. These can tell us about structure and classification, but they leave enormous gaps in our understanding of how ancient animals live. Soft tissues, on the other hand, hold the secrets of physiology, behavior, and evolution. Gills can reveal how animals breathed, eyes can show how they saw the world, and preserved guts can tell us what they ate. Even the presence of fragile filaments or sensory appendages can change our understanding of how ancient creatures interacted with their environment. Some of the animals preserved in these deposits are so strange that they defy easy classification. One Burgess Shale creature, Opabinia, had 5 eyes and a long, flexible proboscis tipped with grasping claws. Another, Ambulocetus, was a fearsome predator with spiny appendages for catching prey and a mouth shaped like a pineapple ring. For decades, paleontologists struggled to understand these forms, often misclassifying them entirely. Only by studying the complete picture provided by Lagerstätten were scientists able to piece together their anatomy and evolutionary relationships. These fossilized ecosystems also reveal how life itself has transformed over time. In the Burgess Shale, the ocean floor teems with small, soft-bodied organisms that would never appear in a typical fossil record. Their presence shows that ancient seas were far more complex and dynamic than previously thought, filled with intricate food webs and ecological niches. The creatures preserved here were not isolated oddities. They were part of entire communities, living and dying together in environments now long vanished. Even microbial life has left its mark in these deposits. Mats of cyanobacteria, the ancestors of modern algae, are often found preserved alongside larger animals. Their presence shows how primary producers formed the base of Cambrian ecosystems, just as they do today. Tiny burrows and feeding traces etched into the sediment speak of worms and other invertebrates moving beneath the seafloor, shaping the environment in subtle but vital ways. Every Lagerstätte is a time capsule, a moment in Earth's history preserved with extraordinary clarity. They are not just records of individual species, but of interactions, behaviors, and entire worlds that have disappeared. Without them, our understanding of evolution would be incomplete, missing the soft details that make life so varied and complex. And so, when paleontologists split open the thin slabs of shale from these ancient seabeds, they are not merely uncovering fossils. They are opening windows into ecosystems that once flourished in warm, shallow seas, long before vertebrates crawled onto land or plants took root in soil. These sites remind us that the story of life is not only written in bones, but also in the soft, fleeting shapes that rarely survive, and yet, here, somehow, still do. In the summer of 1861, a quarry worker in southern Germany split open a slab of fine limestone and revealed something no one had ever seen before: Pressed between the layers of stone was the ghost of a creature from a forgotten world. It had the long, bony tail and sharp teeth of a small dinosaur, but along its arms and tail were delicate impressions of feathers, preserved in astonishing detail. This fossil, discovered in the Solnhofen limestone, would later be named Archaeopteryx, meaning ancient wing, and from the moment it was unearthed, it would change the way we understand the story of life on Earth. The world in which Archaeopteryx lived was very different from our own. About 150 million years ago, during the late Jurassic period, Europe was a patchwork of tropical islands scattered across a shallow sea. Warm lagoons and coral reefs stretched beneath humid skies, and forests of ferns and conifers covered the land. Small dinosaurs scurried among the undergrowth, giant pterosaurs soared overhead, and in the branches above, something remarkable was beginning to happen. The age of birds was about to begin. Before the discovery of Archaeopteryx, the idea that birds were descended from dinosaurs was little more than speculation. Most scientists of the 19th century saw the two groups as entirely separate. Dinosaurs were thought to be cold-blooded, reptilian, and lumbering, while birds were warm-blooded, agile, and highly specialized for flight. The fossil from Solnhofen shattered that divide. Here was a creature that was neither fully dinosaur nor fully bird, but something in between, a bridge across one of evolution's greatest transitions. The details of Archaeopteryx's anatomy reveal just how transitional it was. Its teeth were small and sharp, perfectly suited for catching insects or small prey, a feature no modern bird possesses. Its long tail was stiff and bony, resembling that of a small theropod dinosaur rather than a bird's lightweight fan of feathers. Its hands ended in 3 clawed fingers, and its legs were strong and muscular, built for running as well as perching. But layered over this dinosaurian frame were feathers, not just scattered tufts but fully formed flight feathers, arranged in a way almost identical to those of modern birds. They show the asymmetric shape that allows for lift and maneuverability, proving that Archaeopteryx could glide and perhaps even flap its way into the air. The discovery provided direct evidence that birds evolved from theropod dinosaurs, a group that includes well-known predators like Velociraptor and Deinonychus. Later, fossil discoveries would confirm this connection beyond doubt. Many small theropods have since been found with feathers, wing-like forelimbs, and even wishbones. Some, like Microraptor, had feathers on both their arms and legs, suggesting that flight evolved in a series of experimental stages rather than appearing suddenly. But Archaeopteryx was the first clear piece of that puzzle, the fossil that showed that flight was not a miracle of sudden invention, but the result of gradual transformation. What makes fossils like Archaeopteryx so important is that they capture moments of transition, evolutionary snapshots, showing how one major group of animals gave rise to another. Most of the fossil record is incomplete, offering scattered fragments of species that seem fully formed. Transitional fossils are rare because evolution itself is a slow and continuous process, and the conditions needed to preserve such forms are exceptionally specific. To find one that records such a profound shift from ground-dwelling predator to airborne flyer is to glimpse evolution in action. The discovery also reshaped how scientists think about dinosaurs themselves. Archaeopteryx and the feathered theropods that followed revealed that many dinosaurs were far more bird-like than once believed. They were likely warm-blooded, active, and covered in feathers that served not only for flight, but also for insulation, display, and possibly even brooding eggs. The traditional image of dinosaurs as sluggish reptiles gave way to a picture of dynamic, complex animals whose descendants still live among us in the form of more than 10,000 bird species. Archaeopteryx's story did not end with that first fossil. Over the decades, more specimens were uncovered, each adding new details. Some show impressions of wing muscles and tail feathers, while others reveal traces of pigment that hint at its original coloration. These discoveries allow scientists to reconstruct not just how it looked, but how it might have behaved, how it hunted, perched, and perhaps even leapt from tree branches to glide from place to place. The limestone that preserved Archaeopteryx owes its remarkable detail to the environment in which it formed. The Solnhofen lagoons were shallow, warm, and often low in oxygen, which slowed decay and prevented scavengers from disturbing the remains of animals that fell into them. Fine sediments gently buried these creatures, preserving even the most delicate features like feathers that would normally be lost. Without such rare conditions, this fossil and the evolutionary story it tells might never have reached us. Archaeopteryx is more than a fossil. It is a turning point in the history of life, a record of a moment when the ground and the sky ceased to be separate worlds. It shows that flight did not appear fully formed, but was built piece by piece, feather by feather, bone by bone. It connects two realms of life that once seemed worlds apart, revealing them as branches of the same tree. And it reminds us that every creature alive today, no matter how specialized or distant it seems, carries within it the echoes of the deep past, a history written not just in bones and feathers, but in the very shape of life itself. Almost 400 million years ago, long before dinosaurs roamed the earth or forests shaded the land, the world was ruled by water. The continents were bare and windswept, dotted with patches of primitive plants clinging close to the ground. Nearly all complex life lived in the seas, where strange armored fish cruised ancient rivers and shallow swamps. Among them were creatures that, on the surface, looked much like fish we might recognize today, with scales, fins, and gills that allowed them to breathe underwater. But hidden among these early vertebrates were a few that were quietly rewriting the story of life. They were the pioneers of a great transition, the first to test what it might mean to leave the water behind. One of the most important of these pioneers was Tiktaalik, a creature that lived about 375 million years ago during the late Devonian period. Its name means burbot in the language of the Inuit people of northern Canada, where its fossils were first discovered. The place where it was found is as remarkable as the fossil itself, a remote stretch of Arctic wilderness known as Ellesmere Island, where layers of ancient river sediments hold the remains of a vanished world. Back then, this region was much warmer and lay near the equator. It was a landscape of shallow, slow-moving streams, thick with vegetation and teeming with fish and invertebrates. It was here that Tiktaalik thrived, hunting among tangled aquatic plants and muddy riverbeds and occasionally lifting itself onto land. At first glance, Tiktaalik looked like a fish. It had scales covering its body and fins along its sides. It breathed through gills and swam with the flick of its tail. But a closer look revealed something astonishing. Instead of simple fin rays like those of ordinary fish, Tiktaalik's fins contained sturdy bones arranged in a pattern strikingly similar to the upper arm, forearm, and wrist bones of modern land animals. It was not yet a limb, but it was far more than a fin. These bones allowed Tiktaalik to prop itself up in shallow water or even push its way along muddy banks. It was, quite literally, a fish with the beginnings of arms. Its head told a similar story of transition. Unlike most fish, which have their heads fused to their bodies, Tiktaalik had a neck. This meant it could raise its head and turn it from side to side, an ability that would have been useful for spotting prey or predators above the water's surface. It also had eyes positioned on the top of its flat, crocodile like skull, suggesting it spent much of its time in shallow water, watching the world above as well as below. Its lungs, too, were evolving. While Tiktaalik still used gills, it also had primitive lungs that allowed it to gulp air from the surface, a useful adaptation in oxygen-poor water. Fossils like Tiktaalik are invaluable because they capture a moment of transformation that is otherwise invisible. Evolution is a slow, branching process with countless intermediate forms that rarely leave a trace. Most species live and die without fossilizing, and even when fossils do form, they often represent snapshots that seem fully aquatic or fully terrestrial. Transitional fossils bridge that gap. They show not only that the transition happened, but also how it happened step by step, structure by structure. Tiktaalik is one of the clearest examples of this, illustrating the gradual shift from swimming to walking, from water to land, from gills to lungs. Why did animals like Tiktaalik make this leap in the first place? The answer lies in the changing environment of the Devonian world. Rivers and lakes often fluctuated in size, drying up during dry seasons or becoming choked with vegetation. Being able to move from one pool to another or to breathe air when oxygen levels dropped would have been a huge advantage. On land, new opportunities also awaited, untouched sources of food like insects and plants, and freedom from many aquatic predators. These pressures and possibilities created the evolutionary conditions for vertebrates to venture beyond the water's edge. Tiktaalik was not the first step onto land, nor was it the last. Other transitional species followed, refining the structures that would eventually become legs, hips, and vertebrae strong enough to support weight on dry ground. Within tens of millions of years, descendants of creatures like Tiktaalik were walking confidently across the continents, giving rise to amphibians, reptiles, mammals, and ultimately, us. Every step taken by every land-dwelling vertebrate today, every stride of a lizard, every bound of a deer, every human footprint in the sand, can trace its ancestry back to that moment when fins first became limbs. The fossil of Tiktaalik is more than just a relic of a long-dead animal. It is a record of a threshold crossed, a turning point in the history of life. It captures the moment when vertebrates expanded their world from rivers and swamps to plains and forests, when the boundaries of life itself shifted outward, and though it lay buried for hundreds of millions of years, locked in Arctic stone, it still tells that story today. The story of a fish that began to walk. Around 50 million years after Tiktaalik first pushed itself onto land, another creature would begin the journey in the opposite direction. Its ancestors had long since evolved into mammals, living on land, breathing air, and raising their young away from the water. They were warm-blooded, covered in fur, and walked on four legs. But something drew them back toward the sea, perhaps the promise of abundant food, perhaps an escape from competition and predators on land. Whatever the reason, a remarkable transformation began. Over millions of years, a lineage of land-dwelling mammals would abandon the shore and become masters of the ocean once again. And one of the most extraordinary fossils capturing this transition is a creature called Ambulocetus, the walking whale. Ambulocetus lived about 48 million years ago during the early Eocene epoch, a time when Earth was warm and tropical forests stretched far beyond the equator. The continents were shifting toward their modern positions, and shallow seas flooded low-lying regions of what is now Pakistan and India. It was in one of these ancient coastal environments that the fossilized bones of Ambulocetus were discovered, preserved in rocks that once formed the edge of a prehistoric sea. At first glance, its skeleton might have looked puzzling. the body of a mammal, yet adapted for a life that was neither fully terrestrial nor fully aquatic. It was about 3 meters long, roughly the size of a large sea lion, with a long, flexible spine and a powerful tail. Its limbs were strong but shaped for paddling, and its large webbed feet would have made it a strong swimmer. It had a long snout filled with sharp teeth, and its ears were specially adapted for hearing underwater. But what truly set Ambulocetus apart was its ability to move with surprising agility, both in water and on land. It could swim like an otter, undulating its spine and propelling itself forward with strong kicks. On land, it could haul itself out of the water and walk, albeit clumsily, on 4 legs. It was, in every sense, a creature caught between 2 worlds. This in-between form is precisely what makes Ambulocetus so important. It provides a rare and vivid snapshot of the evolutionary transition from land mammals to whales. Before its discovery, the earliest whales known to science were already fully aquatic, with streamlined bodies and flippers instead of legs. Ambulocetus filled in a crucial gap, showing how the shift from walking on land to swimming in the sea unfolded step by step. Its anatomy tells that story in remarkable detail. The structure of its hips and hind limbs shows that it still bore significant weight on land, while the shape of its vertebrae and tail suggests strong swimming capabilities. Its skull reveals a powerful jaw suited for catching fish or ambushing prey near the water's edge. Unlike modern whales, which swallow prey whole, Ambulocetus likely used its teeth to grip and tear, behaving more like a crocodile than a dolphin. Its nostrils were positioned near the tip of its snout, but over the course of whale evolution, they would gradually migrate upward, eventually forming the blowholes seen in whales today. Fossils like Ambulocetus do more than reveal anatomy. They also offer clues about behavior and lifestyle. The sediments in which it was found suggest that it lived in brackish environments, such as river deltas and coastal lagoons. It probably spent much of its time hunting in shallow water, lurking beneath the surface before lunging at prey with powerful jaws. On land, it may have returned to rest, bask, or give birth. These behaviors mirror those of modern amphibious mammals like seals and sea lions, which also split their lives between 2 worlds. Ambulocetus was not an isolated evolutionary experiment. It was part of a continuum. Over millions of years, its descendants became increasingly adapted to aquatic life. Their limbs transformed into flippers, their bodies became more streamlined, and their tails evolved into powerful propellers. Their nostrils shifted backward, and their ears developed complex adaptations for hearing in water. Gradually, they lost the ability to support themselves on land. By about 40 million years ago, creatures like Basilosaurus and Dorodon were fully aquatic, resembling the whales and dolphins we know today. The story that Ambulocetus tells is more than a story of anatomy. It is a story of possibility. Evolution does not move in straight lines, nor does it always follow the same path. Life that once adapted to land can return to the sea, just as creatures that once swam in water can learn to walk on land. Each step is shaped by changing environments, new opportunities, and the slow, relentless pressure of natural selection. The fossil record of whales is one of the most complete evolutionary sequences known, and Ambulocetus stands as one of its most iconic chapters. It captures a moment when the ancestors of whales were still learning how to swim, still learning how to live in a new and unfamiliar world. It shows that the giants gliding silently beneath the waves, today, the blue whale, the humpback, the orca, trace their ancestry back not just to the water, but to 4-legged mammals that once walked on land. And in the bones of Ambulocetus, we can still see that ancient journey written clearly, one step and one stroke at a time. More than 3.5 billion years ago, long before forests shaded the continents or animals filled the seas, the Earth was a very different world. Continents as we know them had not yet formed. The planet's surface was dominated by vast oceans and scattered volcanic islands, and the air was thick with gases that would be toxic to us today. There were no trees, no fish, no insects, no dinosaurs. Yet even in this harsh and alien landscape, something extraordinary was happening. Life, simple, microscopic life, was already taking hold. The earliest evidence of that life is not found in bones or shells, but in far more subtle traces, locked within ancient rocks that predate even the oldest continents. These traces are known as microfossils, and they are the faint but unmistakable signatures of Earth's first living organisms. Among the most remarkable of them are structures called stromatolites, layered formations built by colonies of microbes that once thrived in shallow seas billions of years ago. Stromatolites form slowly, almost imperceptibly, as microbial mats trap and bind sediments while also precipitating minerals from the water around them. Over centuries and millennia, these layers build upward, creating dome-shaped or column-like structures that can reach impressive sizes. The microbes responsible for this process were primarily cyanobacteria, tiny organisms that harnessed sunlight through photosynthesis. By producing oxygen as a byproduct, they gradually transformed the atmosphere, paving the way for the complex life that would follow. Some of the oldest known stromatolites are found in the Pilbara region of Western Australia and the Barberton Greenstone Belt of South Africa. These ancient structures are more than 3.5 billion years old, making them older than most of the planet's continental crust. When scientists first discovered them, they were stunned. These were not just rocks. They were living landscapes from a time when Earth itself was still forming its first stable surface, and they offered direct evidence that life had taken root astonishingly early in the planet's history. But stromatolites are not the only record of these ancient microbial worlds. In places where conditions were just right, entire mats of microorganisms have been preserved, leaving behind microscopic textures and chemical signatures that speak of their presence. These microbial mats acted like living carpets, growing across tidal flats, around hydrothermal vents, and along the edges of ancient seas. They built complex, layered ecosystems long before multicellular life existed. Some even show signs of early cooperation and specialization, with different layers of microbes performing distinct roles, some producing oxygen, others using that oxygen to break down nutrients, and still others thriving in the chemical gradients between them. Studying these ancient microfossils is a challenge that requires patience and precision. They are often smaller than a grain of sand and can be difficult to distinguish from non-biological structures formed by chemical processes. Scientists use a variety of techniques to confirm their biological origin, from high-resolution imaging to chemical analysis of carbon isotopes that indicate organic activity. The patterns they find: tiny filaments, branching networks, and layered colonies are strikingly similar to microbial communities that still exist today, offering a direct connection across billions of years. These early ecosystems were not static. They evolved in response to a changing planet. In the beginning, Earth's atmosphere contained little to no oxygen, and life relied on chemical reactions involving methane, hydrogen, and sulfur. But as cyanobacteria flourished and released oxygen, they triggered one of the most significant transformations in the planet's history, the Great Oxygenation Event, around 2.5 billion years ago. This shift dramatically altered the chemistry of the oceans and atmosphere, wiping out many early anaerobic life forms while opening the door to more complex organisms that could use oxygen for energy. Microfossils also offer clues about the environments in which life first emerged. Some are found near ancient hydrothermal systems, where mineral rich water provided both heat and nutrients. Others appear in shallow, sunlit waters, suggesting that life may have begun in multiple places and adapted to a variety of conditions. Each discovery refines our understanding of how life can arise and survive, even under extreme circumstances. The significance of these ancient microbial traces reaches far beyond Earth. They show that life can emerge quickly once conditions allow it, perhaps even within a few 100 million years of a planet's formation. This has profound implications for the search for life elsewhere in the universe. If life could arise so early on a young, volatile Earth, then perhaps it could also emerge on other worlds with liquid water and energy sources, places like Mars, Europa, or Enceladus. Every layer of ancient stromatolite, every microscopic fossil embedded in ancient rock, is a message from a world unimaginably distant in time. They are records of Earth's first biological experiments, preserved from an era when life was no more than a whisper against the vastness of the cosmos. Yet from these tiny beginnings would come forests and fish, mammals and birds, and eventually the species reading that story today. The history of life does not begin with bones or shells. It begins here, in the quiet work of microbes, building worlds long before there were continents to stand on. For billions of years, Earth's surface was a barren place. The continents were little more than rocky expanses and shifting sand, washed by rain and scoured by wind. There were no trees to break the skyline, no roots to hold the soil in place, no leaves to catch the sun. Life existed, but it clung to the water. Oceans, lakes, and rivers were its cradle, and almost every living thing depended on the buoyancy and protection that water provided. To leave that cradle was to risk desiccation, starvation, and death. Yet, around 430 million years ago, some organisms began to do exactly that. The first pioneers were not towering forests or lush carpets of moss, but tiny, simple plants no taller than a few centimeters. Among the most ancient known is Cooksonia, a genus that appears in the fossil record during the Silurian period. Cooksonia had no leaves, no flowers, and no roots. It consisted of slender, branching stems tipped with small spore-bearing capsules. These humble structures were enough to anchor it to damp ground and allow it to reproduce. Even without the complexity of later plants, Cooksonia represents one of the most profound turning points in Earth's history, the colonization of land by photosynthetic life. To thrive on land, plants had to overcome obstacles that their aquatic ancestors never faced. In water, cells remained hydrated and supported, and nutrients were absorbed directly from the surroundings. On land, water was scarce, and gravity pulled relentlessly downward. Early plants developed strategies to cope. They evolved waxy coatings on their surfaces to prevent drying, and small openings called stomata to regulate gas exchange without losing too much moisture. They also began to form primitive vascular tissues, internal channels that could transport water and nutrients upward from the soil. These innovations, simple as they seem, laid the groundwork for the forests and fields that now cover the planet. The arrival of plants on land did more than change the appearance of Earth's surface. It began to reshape the planet itself. Through photosynthesis, early terrestrial flora absorbed carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and released oxygen. Over millions of years, this slow but steady process transformed the air, lowering greenhouse gas concentrations and allowing the climate to cool. As plants spread and multiplied, they altered rainfall patterns, stabilized soils, and influenced erosion. Even the chemistry of rivers and oceans shifted, as plant roots drew nutrients from rocks and delivered them to the seas. The presence of land plants also created entirely new habitats. Before their arrival, the continents were lifeless deserts. With vegetation came shade, moisture, and organic matter, which supported microbial communities and small invertebrates. These early ecosystems were primitive, but they set the stage for more complex life to follow. Eventually, animals that had lived exclusively in water found reasons to venture onto land, drawn by the abundance of food and shelter that plants provided. Fossils from this transformative era reveal a gradual but relentless progression. After Cooksonia came slightly larger and more complex plants, such as Rhynia, with more developed vascular systems and branching networks. Soon, early mosses and liverwort-like plants spread across wetlands, forming the first terrestrial mats of vegetation. These were followed by lycophytes and horsetail ancestors that grew taller and sturdier, their stems stiffened by lignin, a tough, organic polymer that allowed them to stand upright and reach toward the sunlight. By the Devonian period, often called the Age of Forests, plants had transformed vast swaths of Earth's surface. The first true trees appeared, some over 10 meters tall, their canopies creating shaded understories and their roots binding soils into rich layers of sediment. The spread of forests accelerated atmospheric changes, drawing down even more carbon dioxide and pumping out vast quantities of oxygen. These shifts contributed to climatic cooling and influenced global weather patterns. They also created the conditions necessary for terrestrial vertebrates to evolve and diversify. The consequences of this botanical revolution extended deep into the earth itself. As roots penetrated rock, they released acids that accelerated weathering, breaking down minerals and releasing nutrients into the environment. This process enriched soils and increased the flow of dissolved elements into rivers and oceans, fueling marine ecosystems and contributing to the formation of limestone and other sedimentary deposits. The cycling of carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus essential to life was fundamentally altered by the presence of plants. It is easy to overlook the significance of these early pioneers when we walk through a modern forest or tend a garden. Yet every towering oak, every blade of grass, and every flower owes its existence to the tiny plants that first crept onto land hundreds of millions of years ago. Their legacy is written into the air we breathe, the soil beneath our feet, and the very climate that sustains us. Before them, Earth was a planet of water and stone. After them, it became a world of forests, meadows, and living landscapes, a planet capable of supporting complex life on land. The journey from the simple stems of Cooksonia to the sprawling forests of the Devonian was slow and uneven, shaped by countless generations adapting to new challenges. But it was also unstoppable. Once life took root on land, it never let go, and the world was forever changed. Long before the seas were filled with familiar shapes like sharks and whales, there swam a creature so strange that when its fossils were first discovered, scientists could not agree on what they were looking at. It had the body of a shark, sleek and built for speed, but inside its mouth was something utterly alien, a coiled spiral of teeth, as if a buzzsaw had been embedded in its jaw. For over a century, paleontologists puzzled over this bizarre structure. Some thought it was part of the tail, others placed it on the snout, or even outside the mouth, like a defensive weapon. The truth, when it finally came into focus, was far stranger and far more fascinating than anyone expected. This was Helicoprion, one of the most enigmatic predators ever to swim the ancient seas. Helicoprion lived around 290 million years ago, during the Permian period, in oceans that looked nothing like those of today. The continents were fused into the supercontinent Pangaea, and vast inland seas teemed with strange and often monstrous life forms. Fish with armor-like scales shared the water with coiled ammonites and ancient sharks, while giant sea scorpions prowled the shallows. In this primeval world, Helicoprion was an apex predator. Estimates suggest it could grow over 8 meters long, slicing through the water with a cartilaginous body and powerful tail. But its most remarkable feature, the one that continues to fascinate scientists today, was the spiral of teeth at the front of its mouth. The tooth spiral, or tooth whorl, was unlike anything seen before or since. It looked like a row of circular saw blades, each tooth growing larger as it curled inward. For decades after its discovery in the 1860s, scientists could not even agree on its position, because sharks and their relatives have skeletons made mostly of cartilage. They rarely fossilize well, leaving behind only teeth. That meant that almost every fossil of Helicoprion consisted solely of this bizarre spiral, with no context to explain how it fit into the animal's anatomy. Some paleontologists imagined it on the lower jaw, some on the upper jaw, and some placed it outside the mouth entirely, like a defensive disc that the animal wielded against attackers. The confusion was understandable. Nothing alive today has anything remotely similar. Fossils of Helicoprion were found on nearly every continent, from what is now Russia to North America, yet they all told the same incomplete story, a strange spiral of teeth, sometimes containing over 100 individual teeth, but little else. It was not until the late 20th and early 21st centuries that technology provided the key to the mystery. Using high-resolution CT scanning on rare, more complete specimens, researchers were finally able to reconstruct the jaw of Helicoprion in 3 dimensions. The results were astonishing. The tooth whorl was not external at all but located deep inside the lower jaw, acting like a conveyor belt of teeth. As the animal grew, new teeth formed at the back of the spiral and gradually moved forward. Unlike modern sharks, which lose old teeth as new ones grow in, Helicoprion retained all of its teeth, stacking them in a continuous coil. This spiral arrangement was not just a curiosity, it was a deadly adaptation. The whorl functioned like a slicing mechanism, pulling prey deeper into the mouth as the animal bit down. Helicoprion likely fed on soft-bodied prey, such as squid and ammonites, gripping them with the tooth spiral and slicing them into manageable pieces. The teeth at the center of the coil were the oldest and dullest, while those at the outer edge were sharp and newly formed, ensuring that the predator always had a cutting edge ready. The eventual solution to the mystery of Helicoprion's jaw revealed much more than just an odd anatomical feature. It offered a rare glimpse into the evolutionary experimentation of early sharks and their relatives. In a time when marine ecosystems were still developing their complex food webs, nature produced many strange and specialized predators. Some, like Helicoprion, were so different from anything that followed that they seem almost alien today. Yet, their adaptations were finely tuned to their environment, shaped by millions of years of evolution and competition. The story of Helicoprion is also a lesson in the challenges of paleontology. For over a century, scientists built theories and models from fragments, each one attempting to solve a puzzle with most of its pieces missing. Only with advances in technology and new fossil discoveries Could they piece together the truth? Even now, questions remain. We still do not know precisely how Helicoprion hunted, how fast it could swim, or how it reproduced. But each fossil adds another line to the story, helping us understand not just this strange animal, but the wider world it inhabited. In the ancient seas of the Permian, Helicoprion's spiral teeth turned silently, slicing through soft flesh and dragging prey into darkness. It was a design so strange that it baffled scientists for generations, a solution so specific that it vanished when its time was done. Yet the fossil record remembers it, preserving a snapshot of evolution's creativity. The buzzsaw jaw of Helicoprion is more than a curiosity. It is a reminder that life has always found extraordinary ways to survive. When most people think of fossils, they picture stone-gray skeletons sealed inside layers of rock, stripped of all the vividness they once had. It is easy to imagine ancient life as a world of muted tones, where dinosaurs lumbered across colorless landscapes under pale skies. For more than a century, that was the only version of prehistory science could see. Bones and teeth told us about size and shape, but the living essence, the skin, the feathers, the colors seemed forever erased by time. Then, in the first decade of the 21st century, something extraordinary happened. Scientists studying a small feathered dinosaur from China uncovered something no one had thought possible: traces of original color, still written into its ancient remains. The discovery did not just add a splash of pigment to our mental picture of prehistory, it opened an entirely new way of understanding how ancient animals lived, interacted, and communicated. The fossil belonged to a creature called Anchiornis, a small, bird-like dinosaur that lived around 160 million years ago in what is now Liaoning Province. This region is famous for its beautifully preserved fossils. The fine volcanic ash that once blanketed its ancient lakes acted like a natural time capsule, sealing delicate details that would normally be lost. In these sediments, paleontologists had found insects with intact wings, plants with visible cells, and even dinosaurs with their feathers still spread around their bodies. But none of those discoveries prepared them for what lay inside Anchiornis. Under a powerful electron microscope, scientists noticed tiny structures embedded within the fossilized feathers. They were so small that millions of them could fit into a pinhead. At first, some thought they were simply remnants of bacteria, but their shape and arrangement were too organized, too consistent. As researchers compared them with those in modern bird feathers, a stunning realization began to emerge. These microscopic bodies were melanosomes, pigment-carrying organelles that, in living animals, give feathers, skin, and hair their colors. Melanosomes come in a variety of shapes, and their structure is closely tied to the color they produce. Long, sausage-like ones often indicate black or gray hues. Spherical ones point to browns and reds. By mapping the shapes and distributions of these melanosomes across Anchiornis's feathers, scientists could do something once thought impossible: reconstruct its original plumage pattern. The results were breathtaking. Anchiornis was not drab or dull. Its body was covered in a soft gray down, its wings patterned with black and white stripes. A striking crest of rusty red feathers flared across its head, while splashes of dark pigment ringed its limbs and tail. For the first time, we were not just imagining how a dinosaur might have looked. We were seeing it with remarkable accuracy, as if it had just landed on a branch millions of years ago. But color is more than decoration. It is one of the most powerful tools life uses to survive. It can attract mates, warn predators, confuse prey, or hide an animal from view. The discovery of Anchiornis's plumage opened new questions about its behavior and ecology. Perhaps its striped wings played a role in display rituals, signaling health or maturity to potential partners. The red crest may have been a visual cue in social interactions, much like the bright feathers of many modern birds. Even its muted body tones might have served as camouflage, helping it blend into the forested habitats of Jurassic China. This breakthrough did more than change how scientists pictured one small dinosaur. It marked the beginning of a revolution. Since Anchiornis, researchers have found fossilized melanosomes in many other species, from the iridescent feathers of Microraptor to the dark, shimmering scales of ancient marine reptiles. In some cases, the discoveries have revealed unexpected adaptations. Fossil evidence suggests that certain dinosaurs may have had countershading dark backs and light bellies, a pattern still used by many animals today to break up their silhouette and avoid detection. Others might have sported elaborate plumage displays, showing that communication through color is far older than previously imagined. The ability to read these chemical and structural signatures in stone has also deepened our understanding of evolution. It shows that the genetic and developmental pathways for producing pigment were already complex in the age of dinosaurs. In fact, many of the same mechanisms that paint a peacock's feathers or a tiger's stripes today were already operating long before mammals or modern birds had even appeared. And yet, these colors are not just scientific data points, they are threads of connection between our world and theirs. They remind us that life in the past was not a silent, monochrome procession, but a vibrant, dynamic spectacle filled with flashes of red, glints of black, and patterns that once shimmered under ancient suns. The discovery of Anchiornis's colors transformed fossils from static remnants into living portraits. It gave us a way to read messages once thought lost messages, written not in bones or stone, but in the language of light and pigment. Through these rare and delicate traces, the past speaks in shades once thought impossible to recover. And with every new fossil that yields its hidden colors, we move closer to seeing prehistoric life not as a distant shadow, but as a vivid, breathing reality. Beneath the frozen soil of the far north, in places where the sun barely rises and the ground has remained locked in ice for tens of thousands of years, lie some of the most extraordinary fossils ever discovered. They do not come to us as brittle fragments or compressed impressions in stone. They emerge with skin still clinging to bone, with hair still soft to the touch, and sometimes with the contents of their stomachs still intact. They are the frozen giants of the Ice Age, sealed away in permafrost, as if the cold itself refused to let them go. This icy archive stretches across the northern reaches of our planet, from the windswept plains of Siberia to the tundra of Alaska and the Canadian Yukon. Here, the ground never truly thaws. It remains frozen year-round, layer upon layer of ice and soil, preserving a record of ancient life that is unlike any other. In these places, mammoths have emerged from melting riverbanks with their tusks still gleaming ivory white. Cave lions have been found curled as if asleep, their fur and whiskers perfectly preserved. Even the heavy, shaggy, woolly rhinoceros, a creature that once roamed in herds across the mammoth steppe, has appeared almost whole, as if time itself had paused around it. The most famous of these finds often come to light by accident. In Siberia, hunters searching for mammoth tusks sometimes stumble across entire bodies thawing from the ground. In Alaska, retreating glaciers and melting permafrost have revealed animals not seen for tens of thousands of years. One of the best preserved mammoths, a young calf nicknamed Liuba, was discovered by a reindeer herder in the year 2007. She had been dead for more than 40,000 years, yet her skin, trunk, and even the milk residue in her stomach were still present. It was as if she had lain down to sleep and never woken up. What makes these discoveries so valuable is not just their astonishing state of preservation, but what they can tell us about a vanished world. Unlike stone fossils, frozen remains often include tissues that hold a wealth of biological information. Hair and skin can reveal details about diet and environment. Stomach contents can show which plants grew on the Ice Age plains. And most remarkably, soft tissue and bone can yield ancient DNA, a genetic time capsule that scientists can read to reconstruct the lives of these long-lost animals. From mammoth DNA, for example, scientists have traced how these animals adapted to the brutal cold. They have identified genetic changes that allowed their blood to carry oxygen more efficiently in freezing temperatures and mutations that help them grow thick, insulating coats. DNA from woolly rhinoceroses and cave lions has revealed their population structures, migration patterns, and how they responded to shifts in climate. In some cases, these genetic clues even show traces of interaction between species predators and prey, locked in an evolutionary dance over millennia. But these frozen remains do more than tell the story of individual species. They are windows into entire ecosystems that once thrived, where tundra now stretches to the horizon. The Mammoth Steppe, a vast belt of grassland that wrapped around much of the northern hemisphere during the Ice Age, supported not just mammoths and rhinos, but bison, horses, wolves, and an array of birds and small mammals. Plant fragments preserved in the stomachs of these animals have revealed a landscape rich in sedges, grasses, and wildflowers, a far cry from the barren tundra that exists today. Pollen grains trapped in their fur or frozen alongside them have allowed scientists to map ancient climates and trace the long-term shifts that reshaped the Earth as the Ice Age waned. Some of the most haunting discoveries have come from predatory species. Cave lions, larger than any big cat alive today, have been found with their fur and whiskers intact, their powerful limbs frozen mid-flex. A pair of lion cubs, buried together in the permafrost of Siberia, still bear traces of the last meal they nursed from their mother. Finds like these offer a glimpse into the social lives and survival strategies of animals that once ruled the Ice Age food chain. Each discovery deepens our understanding of a pivotal chapter in Earth's history, a time when vast ice sheets covered continents and animals were forced to adapt or disappear. And as the climate warms and permafrost begins to thaw, more of these frozen giants are emerging from their icy tombs. With them come new opportunities and new responsibilities. Ancient DNA is providing clues that might one day help revive lost traits, or even, in the case of mammoths, bring parts of the past back to life in living form. But it is also revealing how fragile these ancient ecosystems were, how quickly they changed, and how deeply climate shaped the fate of the species within them. In the stillness of the permafrost, the past waits patiently. The mammoths and cave lions that once roamed in the shadow of glaciers now return to the light, their frozen bodies carrying stories written in muscle, hair, and bone. They remind us that even in the coldest, most remote corners of the world, time does not erase everything. Some echoes of the Ice Age still linger beneath our feet, preserved in perfect, icy silence. Deep in the frozen ground, in the silent depths of caves, and in layers of ancient soil that have not seen sunlight for millions of years, there are fossils unlike any others. They do not resemble the towering skeletons that fill museum halls. They do not take the shape of leaves pressed into stone or shells embedded in limestone. These fossils are far smaller, invisible even under a magnifying glass. They are fragments of DNA strands of life's code that survived long after the creatures that carried them vanished. They are the most intimate messages the past can offer, written not in bone or rock, but in the language of life itself. For much of the history of paleontology, the story of life on Earth was pieced together from what time chose to leave behind. Bones and shells told us about shape and size. Footprints and burrows revealed behavior. But there was always a limit to how much stone could say. Fossils could not tell us about bloodlines or hidden diversity. They could not show us how closely species were related, how they adapted over generations, or how ecosystems once pulsed with life far beyond what bones suggested. That changed when scientists realized that DNA, the blueprint of life, could sometimes endure the passage of time. The first steps in this new science came from the coldest places on Earth. In permafrost and ice, DNA was shielded from the heat, moisture, and oxygen that normally tear it apart. Early studies focused on large, well-preserved remains, such as mammoth tusks and Neanderthal bones. Even though the genetic material was often fragmented into millions of tiny pieces, researchers developed techniques to reassemble those shards, reading them like the torn pages of an ancient manuscript. The results were revolutionary. From a few small bones, the entire Neanderthal genome was reconstructed, revealing that they were not distant evolutionary strangers, but close relatives. Their genes still linger in modern human DNA, shaping our immune systems and influencing traits in ways we are only beginning to understand. But bones and teeth are no longer the only places where scientists look. A far more powerful tool has emerged in the form of environmental DNA, or eDNA genetic fragments shed into the surroundings by living organisms. Every creature leaves traces of itself behind: hair, skin cells, pollen, waste. Over time, these fragments sink into sediments, become trapped in ice, or bind to minerals in soil. Under the right conditions, they can last for tens of thousands or even millions of years. When scientists extract and sequence this DNA, they can reconstruct entire ecosystems, including species that never left behind bones at all. One of the most striking examples comes from the frozen soils of Greenland. There, scientists recovered DNA from 2 million years ago, the oldest ever found, revealing an Ice Age landscape that no fossil record had hinted at. The genetic traces showed that a temperate forest once grew, where today only tundra and ice remain. Mastodons, lemmings, birches, and poplars all live together in a complex ecosystem that has been completely erased from the visible record. Without eDNA, we would never have known that such a world existed. Another case comes from Siberian permafrost, where environmental DNA uncovered the presence of ancient steppe bison and woolly rhinoceroses long before their bones were ever found. In caves in northern Spain, sediments preserved the genetic fingerprints of extinct wolves, bears, and rodents that had vanished without leaving physical remains. And in some cases, scientists have even discovered ghost lineages species that left no bones at all, but whose DNA proves they once lived. One such lineage of ancient horses, known only through genetic traces in soil, reshaped our understanding of how these animals spread across Ice Age Eurasia. This new kind of fossil record does more than list species. It can reveal how populations grew and declined, how animals migrated across continents, and how they responded to dramatic shifts in climate. By analyzing genetic variation in mammoths, scientists traced their slow decline as warming temperatures and human hunters pushed them toward extinction. DNA preserved in sediments shows when forests gave way to grasslands, when predators expanded their ranges, and when diseases swept through entire ecosystems. Even microscopic traces of ancient pathogens found in dental plaque have revealed long forgotten outbreaks that shaped the evolution of humans and animals alike. What makes environmental DNA so powerful is its ability to paint a picture of life that traditional fossils cannot. A single spoonful of ancient soil can contain the genetic echoes of dozens of species, plants, insects, mammals, microbes, all of which once shared the same habitat. It allows scientists to reconstruct complex ecological webs, showing how species interacted, competed, and coexisted. It even captures the presence of creatures that were too small, too fragile, or too rare to ever fossilize. Ancient DNA is delicate, and most of it vanishes with time. Yet, in the few places where it lingers locked in ice, sealed in cave floors, or hidden in layers of lake sediment, it offers something more profound than the shape of a bone or the outline of a leaf. It carries the instructions that built those bones and leaves. It reveals relationships, migrations, and extinctions invisible to stone. And it reminds us that the fossil record is far richer and more intricate than we once believed, stretching far beyond the things we can see into the microscopic traces of life itself. Through these invisible fossils, we are no longer limited to the creatures that left behind skeletons. We can now listen to the whispers of entire ecosystems, reconstructing worlds long vanished and discovering species we never knew existed. Each fragment of DNA is a piece of that hidden story, a genetic breadcrumb leading us deeper into Earth's past, into lives that shape the present in ways we are only beginning to understand. In the cool, dim waters of the Indian Ocean, where sunlight fades into darkness and volcanic slopes plunge into the abyss, a creature swims that should not exist. Its body is armored in rough, blue scales that shimmer faintly like polished stone, and its fins do not flutter like those of most fish. Instead, they move like limbs, sweeping forward and back in a slow, rhythmic gait. This is the coelacanth, a fish that first appeared nearly 400 million years ago and was thought to have vanished with the dinosaurs. Yet here it is, alive and unchanged, as if time itself had forgotten to move forward beneath the waves. The coelacanth story truly began in December of 1938, when a fishing crew off the coast of South Africa hauled up a catch that would stun the scientific world. Among the writhing mass of ordinary fish was a creature no one on board had ever seen: a meter-long animal with fleshy lobed fins, a strange three-lobed tail, and a body that seemed to come from another age. When scientists examined it, they were astonished. Coelacanths were supposed to be extinct, known only from fossils that vanished from the record around 65 million years ago. The idea that one could still be alive was unthinkable. Yet here was living proof that an ancient lineage had survived unnoticed in the depths of the ocean. Coelacanths belong to a group of lobe-finned fish called Sarcopterygians, which also includes the ancestors of amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals. Unlike the thin, fan-like fins of most fish, their fins are fleshy and supported by a central bone structure similar to the limbs of land vertebrates. This connection makes them a critical link in understanding the evolutionary leap from water to land, a transition that reshaped the history of life. But the coelacanth is more than just a relic of that ancient transition. It is also a rare example of evolutionary stasis, a phenomenon in which a species changes so little over vast spans of time that its modern form is nearly identical to its prehistoric ancestors. The reason for this remarkable stability lies in the coelacanth's home and lifestyle. It lives in deep, cold waters, typically more than 200 meters below the surface, where the environment is stable and relatively free from dramatic changes. The conditions here, constant temperature, low light, and few predators, have remained similar for millions of years. In such an environment, there is little evolutionary pressure to change. The coelacanth's body plan, physiology, and behavior are already finely tuned to its niche. Its slow metabolism suits the energy-poor deep sea, and its limb-like fins allow it to hover motionless or move with minimal effort as it hunts small fish and squid in volcanic caves. This stability extends to its internal anatomy as well. Coelacanths retain several primitive features that were once common in ancient fish, but are rare today. They have a hinged skull that allows the front part of their head to swing upward when swallowing prey, and a vestigial lung, a remnant from ancestors that once explored oxygen-poor waters near the surface. Their backbone is not made of solid vertebrae, but a flexible, fluid-filled rod called a notochord, a structure shared with the earliest vertebrates. These features, while ancient, still serve the coelacanth well in its quiet, deep-sea habitat. The coelacanth's biology also reflects its slow and steady approach to survival. It grows gradually, reaching maturity only after many years, and can live for more than a century. Females give birth to live young rather than laying eggs, and their gestation period is among the longest of any vertebrate, lasting up to 5 years. These traits are characteristic of species that inhabit stable environments where the pressures of rapid reproduction and fast growth are less intense. Instead of adapting to constant change, coelacanths have specialized in endurance. Since that first rediscovery in 1938, more coelacanths have been found, including a second species near Indonesia. Despite their fame, they remain elusive, their deep water homes shielding them from human eyes. Scientists still know little about their social behavior, migration patterns, or reproductive cycles. What is clear, however, is that their lineage has persisted largely unchanged through 5 major mass extinctions, shifting continents, and the rise and fall of countless other species. The coelacanth's continued existence is a powerful example of how evolution does not always mean constant transformation. Sometimes, success lies in staying much the same, refining rather than reinventing. When an organism is perfectly suited to a stable ecological niche, natural selection exerts little pressure for drastic change. For the coelacanth, the deep ocean's timeless environment has acted as both refuge and cradle, allowing it to persist almost unchanged while the world above transformed again and again. Today, when researchers peer into the murky depths and glimpse the slow, deliberate motion of a coelacanth's fins, they are not just watching a living fish. They are witnessing a lineage that has followed the same path for hundreds of millions of years, a rare example of evolution's patience. It is a reminder that while many species adapt rapidly to new challenges, others find balance in constancy, and in that balance, they endure. In the hidden canyons of the ocean floor, the coelacanth continues its ancient dance, unchanged and unhurried, as it has for nearly 400 million years. Far beneath layers of rock and ice, hidden under deserts that have not felt rain in centuries, and buried deep below the seafloor where sunlight has never touched, there are stories still waiting to be told. The fossil record, vast and astonishing as it is not a complete book. It is a fragmented library, with many pages missing, many chapters lost, and countless details erased by time. What we have uncovered so far, the skeletons of towering dinosaurs, the delicate impressions of ancient feathers, the frozen remains of Ice Age giants, is only a fraction of what once existed. The rest is still out there, locked away in places we have not yet reached, or perhaps places we have not even thought to look. Scientists often describe the fossil record as a puzzle with most of the pieces missing. More than 99% of all species that ever lived are gone, and the overwhelming majority left no trace at all. Those that did fossilize often lie beyond our reach, sealed in rock strata that lie kilometers beneath the surface or scattered across remote landscapes we have barely explored. Even now, with centuries of paleontology behind us, new discoveries appear with surprising regularity, and each one reminds us how much more there is still to find. Some of the most promising frontiers lie in the harshest environments on Earth. Antarctica, for example, is a continent almost entirely buried beneath ice, yet it was not always so. Hundreds of millions of years ago, it was covered in lush forests and home to a thriving array of plants and animals. Fossils found along its few exposed mountain ranges hint at a rich prehistoric ecosystem, but these discoveries are likely just the beginning. Vast regions of the continent remain unexplored beneath kilometers of ice. Scientists believe that within those frozen depths may lie the remains of entire ecosystems, preserved and waiting for the day when ice retreats enough to reveal them. Deserts, too, guard many secrets. Their dry winds and shifting sands conceal layers of rock that have not been touched for millions of years. In parts of the Sahara, ancient riverbeds that once supported forests and lakes are now buried beneath endless dunes. Beneath them could lie fossils of animals that thrived in climates far different from today's scorching heat. Similar hidden worlds may exist beneath the arid basins of Australia, Central Asia, and the American Southwest, where erosion has not yet peeled back the layers of deep time. Perhaps the most mysterious frontier of all is the ocean floor. Earth's deepest basins cover more than 70% of the planet's surface, yet they remain among the least explored environments on Earth. Thick layers of sediment on the seafloor may hold the remains of ancient marine ecosystems, from the first complex animals to early whales and unknown species that never left a trace on land. Even fossilized remains of meteorite impacts and mass extinction events may lie buried beneath these sediments, preserved in perfect detail but hidden beneath kilometers of water and mud. Until recently, these hidden fossils were beyond our reach, but new technologies are beginning to change that. Advances in satellite imaging and aerial surveys using drones now allow scientists to scan vast regions of desert and tundra for subtle geological patterns that hint at fossil-rich layers below. Ground-penetrating radar can peer beneath the surface without disturbing it, revealing buried bones or ancient trackways. Autonomous underwater vehicles, equipped with sonar and sampling tools, are exploring the seafloor in ways that were once impossible, mapping hidden landscapes and retrieving sediments that may contain microscopic fossils. Artificial intelligence is also transforming the search. Algorithms trained on geological data can predict where fossil-rich strata are most likely to occur, narrowing the search from continents to specific ridges, cliffs, and river valleys. AI models can analyze satellite images for the faint color variations that indicate exposed fossil beds, guiding expeditions to sites that human eyes might overlook. In laboratories, machine learning is being used to scan through thousands of fossil fragments, identifying overlooked details that could point to new species or evolutionary connections. Even with these tools, many discoveries may remain beyond our reach for centuries. Some fossils are buried deeper than any drill can go. Others lie beneath polar ice sheets that will not melt for millennia. Entire chapters of Earth's history may never be uncovered, their traces erased by tectonic upheaval or recycled into the planet's crust. Yet every new discovery, from a tiny feather trapped in amber to the skeleton of a species no one imagined existed expands our understanding and reminds us how much more there is still to learn. The ground beneath our feet is not silent. It holds the echoes of worlds we have not yet glimpsed, species that lived and vanished before our ancestors were even a thought, and stories that stretch back billions of years. Somewhere beneath Antarctic ice, in the heart of a forgotten desert, or under the cold weight of the deep sea, the next great fossil discovery is waiting. It may be a missing link in the chain of evolution, a record of an extinction we never knew occurred, or evidence of life unlike anything we have seen before. And when it is found, it will add one more page to the vast, unfinished story of life on Earth. Beneath the ground we walk on, deeper than the roots of forests and older than the bones of mountains, lies a record of everything that has ever lived. It is not written in any language we speak, yet we have learned to read it. It is written in the curled shell of an ammonite buried in limestone, in the outline of a fern pressed into slate, in the delicate hollow of a footprint left in drying mud hundreds of millions of years ago. These are the words and phrases of Earth's story, scattered and incomplete, yet powerful enough to let us glimpse worlds we could never otherwise imagine. Most of that story is lost. The vast majority of all the living things that have ever existed left no trace at all. Flesh decays, shells crumble, the churn of tectonic plates swallows entire landscapes and the life that once flourished there. Even so, a tiny fraction survives, preserved by luck and circumstance. And in that fraction are the keys to understanding where we came from and what it means to be alive. Each fossil that reaches us is a message from deep time, one that speaks of conditions and lives long vanished. A bone turned to stone is not just evidence of an animal's form, but of the world it inhabited, the climate, the vegetation, the prey it hunted, or the plants it grazed. A ripple of ancient skin or a preserved feather holds stories of temperature, of color, of behavior. In a few cases, even molecular traces remain, strands of DNA or proteins that reveal relationships invisible to the eye. These fragments, pieced together with patience and care, give us more than a catalog of extinct creatures. They give us context, showing how each form of life shaped and was shaped by the world around it. Fossils teach us that change is constant and often merciless. The layers of rock beneath our feet record a planet that has never stood still. Continents have collided and torn apart. Oceans have dried and returned. Atmospheres have thickened, thinned, and shifted their chemical balances. Each change has rippled through the web of life, erasing some lineages and opening opportunities for others. The delicate bones of a fish found in desert sandstone tell us that water once covered that land. The pollen of vanished plants, trapped in ancient mud, reveals climates warmer or colder than anything we know today. Through these clues, we learn that Earth is not a static backdrop for life, but a restless stage upon which life and environment continuously shape one another. They also teach us about resilience, not as a triumphant slogan but as a quiet reality. Life has survived events that, on a planetary scale, seemed certain to erase it. Collisions with rocks from space, eruptions that darkened skies for decades, ice sheets that stretched from pole to pole. Each catastrophe rewrote the story of life, but none brought it to an end. The fossil record shows how organisms adapted in ways both subtle and dramatic. It shows how survivors radiated into empty niches, evolving new forms and behaviors to meet new challenges. This history of adaptation is written into the shapes of teeth, the structure of wings, the chemistry of shells, and it is written into us, too. Our own species is part of that long lineage, shaped by pressures that reach back billions of years. There is humility in this record. It reveals how brief our own chapter is in the grand sweep of time. The age of mammals, for all its diversity and complexity, occupies only the final few pages of Earth's history. Human history itself, from the first stone tools to the building of cities, barely registers as a single line. Yet the fossils also remind us that even the briefest moment can leave a lasting trace, a footprint pressed into volcanic ash by an early hominin, a strand of pollen carried by the wind and trapped in a lake bed. These small, almost accidental marks are now among our most valuable clues to the past. There is also a deeper lesson hidden in these remnants. Fossils show us that life is both fragile and powerful, that it can be wiped out by forces far beyond its control, yet also capable of astonishing recovery and reinvention. They show us that extinction is not failure but part of the process, that the disappearance of one lineage makes room for the rise of another, and they remind us that we too are woven into this fabric. Our actions, our choices, and the changes we make to the planet will shape the fossil record of the future. One day, far beyond our time, the traces of our presence will harden into stone. The remnants of cities may become strange geological layers. The bones of whales and birds, altered by climate change, may tell stories of our impact. The record of life will continue, written layer by layer, and some distant descendant, perhaps human, perhaps not, will read it as we read the rocks today. Fossils are more than relics of a vanished world. They are mirrors held up to our own existence, showing us that we are part of a story far larger and older than ourselves. They reveal the immense depth of time that lies behind us and the uncertain possibilities that lie ahead. And in their silent, unchanging forms, they remind us that while we cannot choose how the past was written, we are, even now, shaping the next chapter.